Lord, guide us in love and forgiveness, and teach us that no mistake is ever greater than the power of grace. Let every heart that listens to this story find comfort, wisdom, and the courage to heal. Amen. Welcome back to Mr. Comfort Stories, your home of comfort, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. Tonight, we open with a scene that would shake anyone to the core. A successful millionaire CEO, Preston, walks into a hospital on what was supposed to be a routine visit. But in a single glance, his entire world tilts. Across the lobby, he freezes because standing at the counter is a woman he once loved deeply, Camille. But she is not alone. At her side stand two boys. Two boys who look so strikingly familiar that Preston's chest tightens as if the air has been pulled from his lungs. The set of their jaws, the curve of their cheeks, even their eyes, grey, stormy, unmistakably his. In that moment, the polished CEO, the man who built an empire out of control and confidence, feels something he hasn't allowed himself to feel in years: fear. Not the fear of failure in business, not the fear of losing deals or money. This is the fear of seeing living proof of a truth he had once run from. Camille looks up, her hand gently resting on each boy's shoulder, and for the first time in years their eyes meet. The weight of history, love, and betrayal charges the space between them. Preston whispers, almost in disbelief, "Camille." But her reply is calm, steady, and sharp enough to cut. "They've grown up just fine without you." The sound of her voice was like a strike across his chest. Preston, the man who had commanded boardrooms and silenced competitors, with a single glance, found himself speechless in front of Camille. His eyes shifted again to the boys. Their sneakers tapped restlessly against the tiled floor, their hands full. Of little drawings they had been clutching from the nurse's station. They were twins, identical in age, but different in spirit. One leaned boldly against Camille's side, studying Preston with curious eyes. The other stayed quiet, almost cautious, but even his silence spoke volumes. Preston's pulse pounded. Every detail screamed the truth he had denied years ago. His jawline traced onto their faces, the shade of his eyes staring back at him. It was undeniable. These weren't just children. They were his children. Camille, on the other hand, stood tall. There was no trembling in her voice, no faltering in her posture. She looked every bit the mother who had carried responsibility alone and carried it well. Her presence wasn't fragile. It was strong, almost radiant, as if the years apart had hardened her in all the places where he had expected her to bend. Preston tried to speak, his throat tightening around words that never formed. 1,000 memories raced through his head: her laughter during summer nights, the warmth of her hand in his, the love he had once believed was unshakable. All of it collided with the reality standing before him. She had gone on without him, and in her silence, she had built a life he was never part of. For the first time in years, Preston, the man who prided himself on control, was utterly powerless. Preston's fingers twitched at his sides, the hospital noise fading until it became nothing but a dull hum in his ears. It was as if the whole building had shifted around him, placing Camille and the two boys at the very center of his world. He took a hesitant step forward. "Camille," his voice cracked. "Are they—" He stopped himself, unable to finish the sentence. Camille's eyes met his squarely. There was no triumph in them, no gloating, only a calm certainty that made him feel smaller than he ever had in his life. She didn't need to answer. The truth was standing right in front of him, staring back with storm-grey eyes that mirrored his own. He saw himself in the older boy's boldness, the same spark he had as a teenager before business hardened him. He saw himself in the quieter one's watchfulness, the same way he'd once studied every room for signs of danger or opportunity. These weren't coincidences. This was blood. His blood. The room tilted. His heart slammed against his ribs. Not in panic, but in recognition. All the years he had told himself he wasn't ready, that fatherhood would ruin him. That children belonged to another life. Those words now rang hollow in his head. They had never been theoretical children. They had been his sons. Preston felt the sting of regret, claw its way up his throat. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their bedtime stories. He had built an empire, but abandoned the only legacy that really mattered. He whispered again, this time not in disbelief, but in confession, "They're mine." Camille didn't nod. She didn't soften. She simply held her boys closer, letting her silence answer for her. Preston's chest rose and fell unevenly. He searched Camille's face for any trace of warmth, any small sign that she might let him explain. But what he found instead was a calm, unflinching strength. "They've grown up just fine without you," Camille said quietly, her words landing heavier than a shout ever could. Her tone wasn't vengeful. It wasn't meant to wound. It was simply truth, delivered by a woman who had carried the weight he'd dropped and carried it with dignity. The twins looked up at her, not fully understanding the storm between. Their parents, but sensing enough to tighten their hold on her hands. To them, she was the constant. She had been mother and father, protector and provider, storyteller and prayer warrior, all rolled into one. Preston's throat burned. For years, he had convinced himself that his life was full, that he didn't need children, didn't need a family. But in that moment, confronted with the living proof of what he had lost, his excuses crumbled like ash. Viewers, let me ask you this. What would you do if the person who once rejected you, your love, your dream, suddenly stood in front of you, face to face with the life they'd abandoned? Would you allow them back in? Or would you shut the door forever? This is the story of a man who thought fatherhood was a burden, and the woman who proved him wrong. A story about love, regret, and the question we all wrestle with: can someone truly change, and is forgiveness worth the risk? Before we dive in, do me a favor, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. It really helps push this story out so more people can hear it. The story of Camille cannot begin with heartbreak or even with Preston. It must begin in Inglewood, where her roots were firmly planted long before life pulled her into the orbit of a millionaire. Inglewood was the kind of neighborhood where you could hear the rhythm of life in every corner. On Saturdays, children raced their bikes down cracked sidewalks while the smell of barbecue carried through backyards. Neighbors didn't just live beside one another, they lived with one another. Aunties, uncles, godparents, and cousins were all part of raising a child, whether related by blood or not. For Camille, this environment was her foundation. She grew up in a home where family dinners were not optional, they were sacred. Her grandmother's collard greens simmered on the stove like a promise that, no matter how hard the week had been, Sunday would bring rest and laughter. Her uncle was famous for his cornbread, golden at the edges, soft in the middle, and always disappearing before the prayer ended. And through it all, her mother's voice carried like music, laughter spilling out of the kitchen as freely as the stories she told. Faith was not just a belief in Camille's household, it was the air they breathed. Sunday mornings were reserved for church, where she learned that life's worth wasn't measured by wealth but by service. Her father, a steady postal worker who never missed her school plays or basketball games, taught her that showing up was the greatest expression of love. Her mother, a devoted public school teacher, modeled compassion by treating every child in her classroom like her own. It was in this world that Camille first understood the value of motherhood. She saw how her mother balanced work, faith, and family without complaint, pouring herself into others without expecting anything in return. She saw how her grandmother, even with weary hands, still carried wisdom that could light up a room and heal a broken heart. Camille didn't grow up with extravagance. She didn't need it. She grew up with the kind of wealth that could never be deposited in a bank, the wealth of community, of being known and loved, of knowing that if she stumbled, there would always be someone to help her back up. From an early age, she dreamed of becoming a mother herself, not because she wanted to check off a box or follow tradition, but because she believed motherhood was the most powerful way of giving back. She carried within her the certainty that raising children was about more than biology. It was about legacy. She imagined creating a home where laughter was plentiful, where love was consistent, and where faith guided every choice. Her cousins often teased her for how she carried the younger kids on, her hip, rocking them to sleep, as though she had been born to do it. "Camille, you act like you 30 already." One cousin laughed when she was just 12. But Camille only smiled, because deep down she knew her nurturing spirit wasn't something she could turn off, it was who she was. By the time she was a teenager, she had absorbed the lesson her family repeated often: a child is never raised by one person but by a village. She believed this with all her heart, but she also dreamed of one day building a family of her own. One where she could pour all of that love into children who carried her name and her values. It was this foundation, community, faith, and the unshakable belief in motherhood, that would one day stand in stark contrast to the man she fell in love with. For Camille, family was not optional. It was the center of everything. If Camille's story began with warmth, Preston's began with frost. He was born in a small Midwestern town where winter seemed to stretch endlessly. And the cold wasn't just outside the windows, it was inside the home too. His father, a strict businessman, valued reputation and results above all else. To him, emotions were a distraction and love was something better kept hidden. Preston never once saw his father clap proudly at a school event, never heard him say the simple words, "I'm proud of you." Instead, their conversations were measured, clipped and transactional. "Did you finish your homework? How many points did you score? Don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors." Preston's mother was a different kind of distant. She had grace, elegance, and a talent for presenting their family as perfect to the outside world. But behind closed doors, she remained a shadow. Hugs were rare, praise was rarer, and when Preston reached out for comfort, she often redirected him with polite words but no affection. It wasn't cruelty, it was absence, a silence that left him hungering for something he couldn't name. By the time he was 16, the home had turned into a battlefield. His parents' marriage collapsed in public, splashed across tabloids, because his father was a known figure in local business circles. The divorce was messy, humiliating, and unforgettable. Preston remembered the sound of shouting through thin walls, the slamming of doors, the stony silence at the breakfast table where no one dared speak. The lesson he absorbed was simple: family breaks you. Love makes you weak. Dependence on others leaves scars you can't erase. From that moment forward, Preston resolved never to lean on anyone. He buried his need for affection under ambition, turning every ounce of hurt into drive. By his early 20s, he was already climbing the corporate ladder. By 30, he had built his own tech company, worth millions before most people. His age had even figured out what they wanted to do with their lives. On the surface, it looked like triumph. His face appeared in magazines, investors lined up to shake his hand, and he moved into a high-rise penthouse that overlooked the Pacific. To anyone else, it looked like the dream, but to Preston, it was armor. Every dollar earned, every headline written about him, was another brick in the wall he built around himself. He told himself he didn't need love. He told himself fatherhood was a trap, a burden that would drag him back into the chaos he had sworn to escape. Control, that was his religion. And in his mind, control and family could never coexist. When people spoke of children, he thought only of risk. A child could be the chink in the armor that allowed pain to seep through. A family could unravel the empire he worked so hard to create. So, while Camille dreamed of children and a home filled with laughter, Preston planned a future where boardrooms and stock charts would be his only heirs. Yet, for all his control, there were cracks he could not see. In the quiet hours, when the noise of meetings faded and the city outside his penthouse windows was asleep, loneliness crept in like an uninvited guest. He had the wealth, the status, and the power, but none of it silenced the echo of the boy who once sat at the dinner table, wishing for just one word of affection from parents too proud to give it. This was the man Camille would one day fall in love with, a man shaped by absence, a man who mistook control for safety. Her warmth would call to him like fire to frost. And yet, his past would whisper in his ear, urging him to run from the very thing he needed most. Camille wasn't the type to splurge on luxury. For her, joy was simple: a fresh book in her hands, the scent of paper and ink, and the thrill of slipping into another world. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, she found herself wandering the aisles of a downtown Los Angeles bookstore. The city outside hummed with traffic, but inside, the world slowed down. She had a paperback open, laughing softly at a witty line that caught her off guard. It wasn't the kind of polite laugh you save for social settings. It was unfiltered, warm, the kind that made strangers turn their heads. One of those strangers happened to be Preston. He had ducked into the bookstore in between meetings, his phone buzzing relentlessly in his pocket. He wasn't there for leisure. Preston rarely allowed himself such luxuries. He was there because his assistant had suggested he pick up a business biography for an upcoming gala. But then, in the middle of an aisle, he heard her laugh. It stopped him. Preston wasn't used to sounds that felt so genuine. The women he met at networking events laughed strategically, adjusting their tone depending on who was watching. But Camille's laughter was different. It disarmed him, softening the edges of his carefully controlled day. "Must be a good one," he said, nodding toward the book in her hands. She looked up, surprised to see a man in a tailored suit standing there, his expression more curious than casual. Her eyes sparkled with humor as she replied, "Depends. Do you like stories where people actually fall in love, or are you one of those who think love is just a business deal?" Her words caught him off balance. Very few people ever challenged Preston outside of the boardroom. He was used to deference, not boldness. Yet, instead of irritation, he felt intrigue. "I like results," he countered smoothly, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "But maybe you can convince me that love belongs in the equation." From that exchange, something shifted. He found himself lingering, asking what else she liked to read. She teased him about probably never finishing novels, and he admitted, somewhat sheepishly, that she wasn't wrong. Camille laughed again, and for the first time in years, Preston realized how much he missed laughter that didn't come with strings attached. Their differences were obvious from the start. Camille came from a world of family cookouts, hand-me-down recipes, and Sunday hymns. Preston lived in a world of glass towers, board meetings, and constant deadlines. Yet in that bookstore aisle, none of it mattered. He asked if she wanted to grab coffee. She almost said no, cautious of men who looked too polished, too self-assured. But something about the way he stood there, almost awkward in his persistence, made her say yes. That simple choice led to evenings where conversations stretched until closing time, where he admitted things he rarely told anyone. For Camille, it was refreshing to meet someone who listened when she spoke about her. Students at the youth center, about her dream of creating safe spaces for kids. For Preston, it was startling to find a woman who looked at him and saw not the CEO, not the millionaire, but the man behind it all. It was a beginning neither of them could have planned. A meeting between two worlds, hers filled with heart, his built on control. That would ignite a love story both beautiful and fragile. The first weeks after their meeting were cautious, almost tentative. Camille wasn't naive. She knew men in expensive suits often came with baggage heavier than their briefcases. Yet, Preston kept showing up, sometimes outside her youth center with coffee in hand, other times waiting outside her favorite bookstore, asking if she had time for dinner. It wasn't just persistence, it was the way he looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't afford to misplace. Against her better judgment, Camille let him in, little by little. Their dates started simple: coffee shops, late-night walks through quiet, city streets, conversations that stretched until neither wanted to leave. But soon, Preston invited her into his world, the one defined by chandeliers, tuxedos, and champagne glasses filled to the brim. The first gala was overwhelming. Camille wore a borrowed dress her sister had helped her style, and though she looked stunning, she felt out of place among women dripping in diamonds. Whispers floated when she walked beside Preston, people asking questions, with their eyes even when their lips stayed politely curved. Preston noticed, of course. At first, he tried to shield her from it, steering her gently toward conversations where he could control the narrative. But Camille wasn't easily silenced. When one guest asked where she had gone to school in the tone of someone measuring her worth, Camille smiled brightly and said, "I went to the school of." Sunday cookouts, and double Dutch competitions on the sidewalk. You'd be surprised what kind of education you get when a whole neighborhood raises you. The blunt honesty startled the woman, but it made Preston laugh. A real unguarded laugh that made Camille relax. From then on, he introduced her proudly, making no attempt to hide how much he admired her. In return, Camille brought Preston into her world. She invited him to her family cookouts, the kind of gatherings where there was no dress code except come hungry. Preston, in his neatly pressed polo, looked out of place among her cousins in jerseys and sneakers, but Camille loved watching him try. Her uncles sized him up, making him prove himself over rounds of spades. Her grandmother pulled him aside, her eyes sharp but kind. "If you hurt her, boy, you'll answer to all of us," she warned. Preston, who could silence a room of investors with ease, found himself nodding like a schoolboy caught in the principal's office. The cousins teased him when he fumbled with the tongs at the grill, and one shouted across the yard, "Don't you dare mess up the ribs, CEO." Preston chuckled awkwardly, but when Camille caught his eye and grinned, he knew he would endure 1,000 more jokes just to stay by her side. The contrast between their worlds was stark. In hers, there was laughter that shook the walls, children running freely, neighbors dropping by with foil-covered dishes. In his, there was quiet formality, people calculating every word and every smile. But it was in those contrasts that their love deepened. Preston admired the way Camille carried herself with confidence no matter the setting. She wasn't dazzled by wealth, nor was she ashamed of where she came from. Camille, in turn, admired the way Preston softened when he was with her family, how he allowed himself to stumble, to laugh, to belong. Together, they began to weave a rhythm between gala nights and barbecue afternoons. Silk gowns and denim jeans, champagne toasts and sweet tea in plastic cups. Two worlds colliding yet somehow complementing each other, creating a love story neither had expected, but both desperately needed. What began as laughter over coffee and nervous introductions at family cookouts soon evolved into something richer, something that lived in the quiet moments between the chaos of their contrasting lives. For Preston, intimacy had always been surface level. Women came and went. Relationships were convenient, transactional even, but never lasting. With Camille, it was different from the start. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or swayed by his polished charm. She wanted to know him, not the CEO, not the magazine cover, but the man. And in her presence, he found himself revealing pieces he had kept locked away for decades. He told her about the loneliness of growing up in a house with two parents who barely acknowledged him, about the silence at dinner tables and the humiliation of watching their marriage collapse in the public eye. He admitted how he buried his pain beneath success, convincing himself that if he controlled everything, he could never be hurt again. Camille didn't interrupt or judge. She listened, sometimes reaching across to take his hand, other times simply holding his gaze until the tension left his shoulders. She offered the kind of comfort that didn't need grand gestures. It was in the way she stayed, steady and unshaken, while he exposed the parts of himself he had always hidden. And she shared herself too. She spoke about her childhood, the faith and family values that shaped her, the joy of watching her mother and grandmother pour love into every child they encountered. She told him of her dream to one day be a mother, to raise children in the same spirit of love and community she had known. Their connection wasn't just physical, though the physical side was undeniable. When Preston was with Camille, the world outside seemed to fall away. Their intimacy was tender and passionate, marked by unspoken trust. The nights they spent together were not just about desire, they were about surrender. Preston, who had always guarded his heart like a fortress, let her in. And Camille, who had always believed in love's promise, gave herself fully, body and soul. It was during those nights, wrapped in his arms, that Camille began to hope. She believed their love wasn't fleeting, that it was building toward something permanent. She saw in him not just a partner, but the father of the children she longed for. Every time he teased her about lighting up a gala, or she laughed at how he stumbled, through her cousin's slang, she pictured a future where their worlds blended into one. For Preston, the thought of family was something he didn't speak of, but Camille saw flickers of it in his actions, the way he lingered at her mother's house even after dinner ended, the way he bent down to help her nephew tie his shoelaces, the way he looked at her when she talked about children, half fearful, half fascinated. Those moments told her what he couldn't yet admit, that deep down, a part of him wanted it too. It was fragile, that dream, like a flame flickering against the wind, but Camille held on to it. In her heart, she believed that love this strong was meant to grow, meant to bring forth life, meant to build a family. What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that Preston's fear of fatherhood was stronger than her hope. For now, though, in the warmth of their intimacy, all she saw was a man she loved, and a future she dared to believe was already unfolding. The first sign was small, just a late period Camille brushed off as stress. But when the days stretched on, a quiet certainty began to grow inside her. A doctor's appointment confirmed what her heart already suspected: she was pregnant. She sat in her car afterward, hands trembling over her stomach. Fear and excitement battled within her. Fear, because Preston's past words often carried hints of hesitation about children. Excitement, because for Camille, motherhood was not a burden. It was her dream. In her heart, she believed this would change everything. She had seen the way Preston softened in her world, how he bent in ways he never had before. Surely, she thought, holding their child in his arms would erase his doubts. That evening, she dressed carefully. Preston had invited her to dinner at an upscale rooftop restaurant overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. The city lights glimmered like scattered jewels, and for Camille, it felt like the perfect moment to share life-changing news. Across the table, Preston looked as he always did, composed, confident, sipping his wine while fielding quick updates from his assistant by text. But when his eyes met hers, he smiled, and for a moment, she forgot her nerves. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice soft but steady. His brow lifted. "Go ahead." Her fingers tightened around the glass of water in front of her. "Preston, I'm pregnant." For a beat, the world held still. The candle between them flickered, as though the air itself had paused. Camille waited for his smile to widen, for his hand to reach across the table, for some sign that he was as overwhelmed and joyful as she was. But instead, she watched his face shift. The warmth drained from his expression, replaced by a coldness that pierced deeper than any blade. He leaned back, his jaw tight. "I don't want kids, Camille. Not now, not ever." His words were final, delivered with the weight of a verdict. Her heart slammed in her chest. "But you always said maybe, that you just weren't ready yet." "I said what you wanted to hear," he replied, shaking his head. "The truth is, fatherhood doesn't fit into my life. My company is my child. That's the reality." Camille felt her throat close. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had walked into this dinner with hope burning bright inside her. Now, it felt like that hope had been snuffed out in one cruel breath. "Preston," she whispered, her voice trembling, "this isn't just about you. This is about us, about the family we could be." But he looked away, his silence louder than any rejection she had ever known. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just rejecting fatherhood. He was rejecting her dream, her values, the very legacy she had carried from her family in Inglewood. The rooftop restaurant around them continued as though nothing had changed. Laughter, clinking glasses, waiters moving briskly between tables. But for Camille, the night had collapsed. The rooftop wind tugged at Camille's hair as she sat frozen, her heart shattering piece by piece. Preston's words still echoed in her head. Not now. Not ever. She wanted to believe he would take it back, that he'd see the devastation in her eyes and realize what he was throwing away. But Preston remained rigid in his chair, his glass pushed aside, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond her. It was as if she had become invisible in the very moment she needed him most. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but fierce. "I thought we were building a family, Preston. I thought all of this, us, meant something more than your company." His jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Camille, I can't be who you want me to be. If children are what you need, then maybe we're not right for each other." Her chest tightened until breathing felt impossible. This was the man she had trusted with her heart, the man she had imagined raising children with. And now, he was dismissing that dream like it was nothing more than a failed business proposal. She rose slowly from her chair, her fingers trembling as she gathered her purse. Tears blurred the city skyline into streaks of gold and silver, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice breaking but resolute. "Not because of me, Preston, but because one day, when you're sitting in your penthouse, surrounded by everything money can buy, you'll realize it wasn't enough." For the first time that evening, Preston's mask cracked. His hands shook slightly, though his face remained hard. He didn't stop her. He didn't reach for her hand or call her name. Camille turned and walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a drumbeat of finality. Each step was both agony and liberation. Agony, because she was leaving the man she loved. Liberation, because she was choosing herself and the child growing inside her. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Camille let the tears come. Silent, hot, relentless, she pressed her hand against her stomach, whispering a prayer into the emptiness of the night. "I'll take care of you," she promised softly, "even if I have to do it alone." That vow would carry her forward, through the sleepless nights, through the whispers of people who wondered why she raised children without their father, through every challenge she was yet to face. Preston had turned his back on fatherhood, but Camille would never turn her back on the life she carried. She stepped out of that rooftop restaurant, no longer the same woman who had walked in. She was heavier, yes, with grief and disappointment, but also stronger. Because in the middle of heartbreak, Camille discovered her resolve. She would protect her children, and she would never let them feel unwanted. That was the night their paths split. Preston into a world of wealth and control, Camille into a world of sacrifice and fierce love. And though neither knew it then, fate had not finished weaving them together. Camille's cab ride home that night was silent except for the faint hum of the engine. She sat with her hand resting over her stomach, her mind replaying every word, every look, every moment of the dinner. The city lights outside the window blurred, as though the world itself was weeping with her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she could no longer lean on Preston. She would walk into motherhood with her head held high, armed with faith and the strength of her upbringing. Her child would know love, even if they never knew their father's embrace. In the weeks that followed, Camille buried herself in work, in prayer, and in the quiet preparation for the life that was coming. Some nights she wept into her pillow, grieving not just the man she lost, but the dream of a family she thought they would share. Other nights she felt fire in her veins, a determination that no rejection could extinguish. Her mother's words often came back to her: "A child is a blessing, no matter the circumstance." And in that truth, Camille found her courage. She would raise her child not in bitterness, but in love. Preston, meanwhile, returned to his high-rise penthouse, convincing himself he had made the right choice. He poured his energy back into his company, telling himself success would fill the emptiness. But behind the polished glass walls, he was alone, and deep inside, he knew it. And so, their stories began to drift apart, each carrying a secret weight. Camille with her growing belly and steady resolve, Preston with his hollow victories and unspoken regret. This is where the real journey begins. A woman building a new life out of heartbreak. A man trying to silence the voice of love he turned away. Two twins yet to be born, carrying the future that would one day bring them all back together. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Camille's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have told Preston about the pregnancy, hoping he would change? Or would you have walked away like she did, protecting yourself and your child from more disappointment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your perspective might just help someone else wrestling with the same questions in their own life. And while you're here, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves powerful stories, and subscribe to Mr. Comfort Stories. Every click helps this community grow, and keep stories like this coming your way. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a story about Camille and Preston. It's about choices, courage, and the cost of love. And those lessons? They belong to all of us. The morning after that rooftop dinner, Camille woke up in her small apartment, with swollen eyes and an ache in her chest that no amount of sleep could ease. The city outside was alive with car horns and vendors opening up shop, but inside her room, it was silent, heavy with the decision she had made. Preston was gone, and she was alone, but not truly alone. She pressed her hand to her stomach, whispering through her tears, "It's you and me now." At first, she tried to go about her days as though nothing had changed. She still worked at the youth center, still answered phone calls from friends, still showed up at family dinners, but her mind was never free. Every errand carried weight. Every night reminded her that she was preparing for motherhood without the man she had once loved. The hardest part was telling her family. She dreaded the questions, the looks, the pity she thought would follow. Yet, when she finally sat across from her mother one Sunday evening and let the words spill, "I'm pregnant, and Preston isn't in the picture," her mother didn't scold or sigh. Instead, she took Camille's trembling hands into her own. "My child," her mother whispered, her eyes glistening, "a baby is never a mistake. You hear me? This little one is a blessing, and you will not raise them alone. We'll walk with you." That promise became a lifeline. Her father, though quieter, placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You've always been strong, Camille, stronger than you know. This baby will have a family." His words were simple, but in them, she felt the assurance that she wouldn't have to carry her burden in silence. Her grandmother, too, gave her the kind of wisdom only years could provide. "Men may come and go, but children are forever. Don't waste your tears on someone who couldn't see your worth. Pour your love into the life God has trusted you with." With that support, Camille began her journey through pregnancy. But it wasn't easy. The physical challenges hit quickly. Morning sickness that left her weak, swollen feet, that ached at the end of long shifts at the youth center, nights when sleep seemed impossible. She didn't have Preston to hold her hair back when nausea overtook her, or to rub her back when her body felt heavy. Instead, her sister stayed over on the hardest nights, rubbing circles on her shoulders while reminding her that she was not alone. Financially, the struggle was real. Though she had steady work, her paycheck was stretched thin as she tried to prepare for the twins she didn't yet know she carried. She clipped coupons, skipped luxuries, and leaned on her family when expenses piled up. Sometimes she cried in secret, mourning the stability Preston could have provided if only he had chosen differently. But each time despair tried to drown her, she returned to her faith. She read scripture late at night, clinging to verses about strength, provision, and God's plans for her and her child. She prayed not for Preston's return, but for courage, for endurance, for the ability to give her child the love they deserved. Camille also found herself clinging to the rhythms of community. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles when they learned of her pregnancy. Her cousins teased her gently, reminding her that motherhood was in her blood. Even at church, women hugged her tightly, offering hand-me-down baby clothes and prayers that stretched long into the evening. And slowly, though she still carried heartbreak, Camille began to transform. The girl who had once looked at Preston with stars in her eyes became a woman who carried herself with quiet strength. Her belly grew, and with it, her resolve. She was no longer simply a woman who had been abandoned. She was a mother in the making, fierce and determined. Yes, the beginnings were tough, financial strain, physical exhaustion, and moments of loneliness that clawed at her. But for every hardship, there was a hand holding hers, a voice reminding her she was not forgotten. And as her stomach grew, so did her vision. She would raise her child in the same spirit of love she had been given. Preston had turned away, but Camille would not. The summer heat hung heavy over Los Angeles when Camille went into labor. The sun had barely set when her contractions began, sharp and sudden, stealing her breath as she clutched the arm of her sofa. Her mother rushed to her side, calm but urgent, guiding her into the car, while her sister gathered the hospital bag she had packed weeks before. Camille's heart pounded as the city lights blurred past the car window. Fear pressed in on her. Fear of the pain, fear of the future, fear of doing it all without Preston. But when her mother squeezed her hand and whispered, "Breathe, baby, God is with you," a sense of determination rose inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for the lives she carried. At the hospital, the nurses quickly realized she wasn't delivering just one child. The second heartbeat had been faint during earlier appointments, and doctors hadn't been certain. But now, as the monitors lit up, it was undeniable. Camille was having twins. The news sent a wave of shock and awe through the delivery room. Camille's mother clasped her hands together, whispering a prayer of thanks. "Double the blessing," she said through tears. "Double the strength." Hours of labor stretched on, sweat soaking Camille's brow as she pushed with every ounce of strength she had. Her sister stood at her side, whispering encouragement. "You can do this, Camille. You were made for this." Finally, with a cry that filled the room, the first baby was born. A boy, strong-lunged and fierce, his fists clenched as though he was already ready to fight the world. Camille wept as she held him briefly against her chest, the nurses quickly tending to him before preparing for the second delivery. Minutes later, another cry followed. Softer, more measured, but equally powerful in its own way. Another boy. Camille's tears flowed freely as she reached for him too, her heart swelling. With a love so vast it erased every trace of loneliness she had carried, she named them Malik and Isaiah. Malik for strength and resilience, Isaiah for wisdom and vision. Names that spoke of history, of purpose, of hope. The room was filled not just with medical staff, but with Camille's family. Her mother hovered proudly, her father stood just outside the door with watery eyes, and her grandmother whispered scriptures of blessing. Her sister snapped photos, her hands trembling as she tried to capture the miracle of two perfect boys swaddled in blankets. When Camille finally lay back against the pillows, exhausted but elated, she realized that her fear had been replaced with something else: resolve. She wasn't raising these children alone. The village that had raised her was now wrapping itself around Malik and Isaiah. Over the following days, the community poured in. Neighbors brought food and diapers. Cousins rotated shifts to help her rest. Church members arrived with bags of baby clothes, toys, and warm meals. The little apartment was crowded, noisy, and chaotic. But Camille wouldn't have traded it for anything. Everywhere she turned, love surrounded her. Malik was passed from one set of arms to another, his loud cries met with laughter and soothing hums. Isaiah was cradled by her grandmother, who swayed gently in a chair, whispering prayers over him. Camille, though tired beyond measure, felt held up by the people around her. On the nights when the twins cried together and her body screamed for rest, her mother slipped into the room to rock one of them. On mornings when she doubted herself, her grandmother reminded her, "God chose you for this, and he never makes mistakes." In those early days, Preston was the last thing on Camille's mind. Yes, he had walked away. Yes, the thought of him still brought a pang of pain. But she looked at Malik and Isaiah and knew she had been given something far greater than what she had lost. The boys had come into the world, not surrounded by wealth or luxury, but by community, prayer, and a love that overflowed. And in Camille's eyes, that was more valuable than any penthouse or empire Preston could ever offer. As she held her sons close, Camille whispered the vow she had made months before, now with even more conviction. "I'll take care of you, with everything I have." The first weeks with Malik and Isaiah were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Camille had prepared herself for hard work, but no amount of advice or hand-me-down wisdom could truly capture the weight of raising two newborns at once. Her days blended into nights. She woke every 2 hours to cries that overlapped and collided, often holding both babies in her arms while rocking back and forth in the small living room. Her body ached from the delivery, her eyes burned from fatigue, but she forced herself to keep moving. Her mother and sister helped when they could, but they both had their own responsibilities. There were moments Camille found herself standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., bottle in, one hand and a crying baby on her shoulder, wondering how she would ever keep this up. The apartment, once simply modest, now felt too small. Baby clothes lined the couch, bottles filled the sink, and the sound of Malik's strong wails often set Isaiah crying too. Camille tried to laugh at the chaos, but there were nights she collapsed into tears, overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of doing it alone. Finances were another battle. Diapers disappeared faster than she could replace them. Formula ate into her. Paycheck and medical bills for checkups piled higher than she expected. She had always stretched her budget carefully, but with twins, it sometimes felt like her efforts were swallowed whole before she even began. There were moments when bitterness threatened her resolve. When she rocked both boys to sleep in the cramped apartment, she thought of Preston. His penthouse, the quiet, the luxury, the resources he hoarded while she struggled. She wondered if he ever thought of her swollen ankles, of the nights she spent alone pacing the floor. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away, refusing to let resentment poison the love she poured into her sons. Her greatest struggle was the isolation. Friends from before slowly drifted away, too busy with their own lives. Invitations to social events dwindled until they stopped altogether. Camille's world shrank to the size of her apartment and the daily rhythm of caring for her twins. Still, she clung to the small victories. When Malik's first smile lit up his tiny face, it erased a week of exhaustion. When Isaiah curled his little fingers around hers, it renewed her strength. She began to understand that motherhood was less about perfection and more about persistence. The daily choice to keep going, even when every part of her body begged to quit. The hardest nights often ended in prayer. Sitting cross-legged on the bed with both boys finally asleep beside her, Camille whispered into the silence, "Lord, give me strength. Don't let me fail them." She didn't ask for wealth or for Preston to return. She asked only for endurance, for patience, for the ability to provide. And somehow, each morning, she rose again, weary but resolute. The weight of single motherhood was heavy, yes, but in those early months, Camille discovered a resilience she never knew she had. She was exhausted, broke, and often lonely, but she was also unyielding. Her boys depended on her, and that was reason enough to face every struggle with her chin lifted. What Preston had abandoned, she carried with pride. For every sleepless night and every tear of exhaustion, Camille found joy tenfold in the little moments that made motherhood radiant. The struggles were real, yes, but so too were the blessings that filled her days with light. By the time Malik and Isaiah were a few months old, their differences began to reveal themselves. Malik was bold from the start, loud in his cries, quick to demand attention. When he wanted milk, everyone knew. When he was uncomfortable, his tiny fists waved like he was ready to fight the whole world. He was a burst of energy, a child who refused to be ignored. Isaiah, on the other hand, was thoughtful even as an infant. His cries were softer, often delayed, as though he first paused to take in the situation. His eyes lingered longer on faces, studying each expression. He seemed to notice everything, his brother's movements, the shifting light in the room, even the tone of his mother's voice. Camille marveled at their differences. Some days she joked with her sister, "Malik's going to be the one who charges into life head first, and Isaiah's going to be the one planning the whole thing out." Her sister laughed, agreeing that the boys were destined to balance each other. As they grew, their personalities became even clearer. Malik rolled over first, then crawled first, always eager to test the limits of what his small body could do. Isaiah was slower, deliberate, but once he mastered something, he did it with ease, almost as if he had been practicing silently in his mind. Camille's joy wasn't just in watching them grow individually, but in watching how they complemented each other. When Malik snatched toys too quickly, Isaiah often sat patiently, waiting for his turn. When Isaiah grew upset at loud noises, Malik's chatter distracted him until he laughed again. They were different, yet inseparable, bound by something deeper than just being born minutes apart. Family members adored the twins, each developing their own special bond. Camille's father loved carrying Isaiah on his shoulder, saying the boy's calm nature reminded him of quiet evenings after work. Her mother doted on Malik, insisting his boldness was a sign of leadership. "That one's going to keep you on your toes, Camille," she teased. church became another source of joy. Every Sunday, Camille dressed the boys in their tiny suits, their curls neatly combed, their shoes polished by her careful hands. The congregation welcomed them with cheers and open arms. Older women took turns rocking them during service, whispering prayers over their small heads. The twins became a symbol of resilience in the community, proof that even in abandonment, beauty and blessing could grow. For Camille, joy often came in quiet, fleeting moments. The way both boys giggled uncontrollably when she blew raspberries on their bellies. The way their tiny hands searched for hers as they drifted off to sleep. The first time Malik said "Mama," her heart swelled so fiercely she thought it might burst. And when Isaiah followed soon after, she wept, knowing every hardship had been worth it for that single word. There were still challenges, of course. Malik's energy often wore her out, and Isaiah's endless curiosity required constant vigilance. But those challenges paled against the love that filled their home. Their laughter bounced off the apartment walls, turning even the smallest space into a place of warmth. Camille would often sit in the rocking chair late at night, both boys asleep on her chest, and whisper, "You are my joy. You are my future." In those moments, she felt complete, not because everything was perfect, but because she was surrounded by the love she had always dreamed of giving. Malik and Isaiah were more than just her children. They were living reminders that even after rejection, new beginnings were possible. They were her proof that God's blessings often came double, and that love could multiply even in the absence of wealth. As the twins grew, Camille's life began to find a rhythm, demanding, exhausting, but purposeful. Every morning started early, often with Malik bouncing in his crib before the sun was up, and Isaiah babbling softly beside him. She fed them, changed them, and prepared for another day, not just as a mother but as a woman determined to serve others. Camille had worked at the youth center long before her pregnancy, but after the twins were born, her commitment deepened. She knew what it meant to feel unsupported, to stand at a crossroads with little more than faith to carry her. That knowledge gave her a heart for the young people she served, kids who came from broken homes, children wrestling with poverty, and teens tempted by streets that promised fast money but little peace. Her colleagues admired her resilience. They watched her arrive at the center with 2 toddlers in tow, a diaper bag on her shoulder, and still managed to lead workshops, organize events, and lend a listening ear to the youth who trusted her. When she spoke to the kids, her words carried weight because she lived what she preached. One boy asked her once, "Miss Camille, why you work so hard? Don't you got enough problems of your own?" She smiled, kneeling to his level. "Because someone worked hard for me when I was your age, and I promised I'd pass that same love on. Problems don't stop love. If anything, they make it stronger." The youth center became a second home for Malik and Isaiah. While Camille taught classes or counseled teens, her mother or sister would watch the boys in the play area. They grew up surrounded not just by family, but by a whole community of people who cared. The teens doted on them, jokingly calling the twins little CEOs because they strutted around the center with confidence. Balancing everything wasn't easy. There were days Camille left the center drained, pushing the stroller up, the apartment stairs with muscles aching from more than just motherhood. At night, she would sit at the kitchen table after the boys fell asleep, planning budgets, writing grant proposals, and strategizing ways to keep the non-profit funded. Some nights, tears slipped down her cheeks as she wondered if she was giving enough to her sons, to the kids at the center, to herself. But every doubt was answered in small moments of affirmation. A teenager she mentored graduated high school against all odds. Another chose college instead of the streets, telling her, "Miss Camille, you're the first person who ever believed I could do better." Those victories reminded her why she fought so hard, why she refused to fold under pressure. Her faith carried her through too. Sundays were sacred. She dressed Malik and Isaiah in neat little outfits and marched them into church, where the congregation often applauded her determination. The pastor once said during a sermon, "Camille is proof that God can use broken situations to bless entire communities." The congregation clapped, and though Camille blushed, she held her boys a little tighter, knowing the truth of those words. Giving back wasn't a burden to her, it was her calling. She understood what it meant to be lifted up by a village, and she believed in paying that forward. She poured herself into others, not because life had been easy, but because it had been hard, and that hardship had birthed compassion. Malik and Isaiah would grow up watching their mother lead, serve, and sacrifice. And though they were too young to understand it yet, those lessons would one day shape the men they became. Camille's life was far from glamorous. She had no penthouse, no designer gowns, no million-dollar empire. What she had was far more enduring, a community that loved her, children who depended on her, and a purpose that kept her going even when her body wanted to quit. And in that purpose, she found joy that no rejection could erase. While Camille poured herself into the world of family and service, Preston's life followed a very different path. On the surface, he had everything a man could want. His company was exploding in value, branching into international markets. Prestigious magazines called him the future of tech innovation. Investors courted him, and elite circles in New York and Los Angeles hung on his presence at galas and fundraisers. His penthouse overlooked the ocean, its floor-to-ceiling windows stretching, wide enough to capture sunsets that could have taken anyone's breath away. The closet was lined with designer suits, his garage with luxury cars, his calendar with non-stop meetings and high-profile appointments. Yet, for all the glitter, his nights were hollow. The women who appeared on his arm at events were always temporary. Models, socialites, business partners' daughters, they posed with him for photos, whispered sweet nothings at dinners, but left no real mark. He rarely called them twice, and they rarely asked for more. These relationships were convenient, shallow arrangements, never meant to endure. Preston told himself this was what he wanted. No commitments, no ties, just freedom. But when the lights dimmed and the parties ended, he came home to silence. The penthouse, immaculate and cold, echoed with emptiness. He would pour himself a glass of bourbon, sit on his leather couch, and stare. Out at the Pacific, as if the waves could answer questions he refused to voice. Some nights, he scrolled through old contacts on his phone, his finger hovering over Camille's name before locking the screen. He reminded himself of his decision. He wasn't meant to be a father. Yet the memory of her laugh, the softness of her touch, the way she had looked at him with unguarded trust, all of it lingered like a ghost he couldn't shake. In boardrooms, he commanded attention with ease. He negotiated mergers, secured investors, and doubled his company's value. But victories felt shallow. He received standing ovations from shareholders, only to return to a penthouse, where no one clapped, no one smiled, no one asked how his day was. Loneliness began to shadow him even in public. At charity galas, he caught himself watching families, the way a mother smoothed her child's hair, the way a father's arm rested protectively around his daughter. These small gestures pierced him more deeply than any financial loss could. Still, he buried the feeling, convincing himself success was enough. He filled his days with meetings, his nights with distractions, and told himself that the emptiness was simply the cost of greatness. But in the quietest hours, when sleep evaded him, Preston sometimes caught a glimpse of what he had lost. A flash of memory, Camille teasing him at her family's cookout, or her voice whispering promises in the dark. He would shut his eyes, willing the thoughts away, but they always returned, reminding him that for all his power, he had no one to share it with. The empire grew, yes. His name was known, his wealth unmatched, but the man at the center of it all remained unsatisfied, haunted by a choice that had given him control, but stolen his chance at the very thing his heart secretly craved: connection. It started in the quiet moments. Preston could silence the noise of the world, boardroom debates, market, reports, the hum of city nightlife, but he couldn't silence memory. One night, after signing a major contract that had been months in the making, he came home to his penthouse with a bottle of champagne. His assistant had left congratulatory notes. His board sent messages of praise, but none of it mattered. He opened the bottle, poured a glass, and sat down alone at his dining table meant for 12. As the bubbles fizzed, so did the memories. He saw Camille's face the night she first introduced him to her family, He remembered her grandmother's warning. If you hurt her, you'll answer to all of us. The pride in Camille's eyes that evening returned to haunt him now, because he had hurt her. And worse, he had walked away from the family she longed for. The flashbacks came uninvited. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he woke to the phantom sound of her laugh echoing in his mind. Other times, it was during a gala, when a woman in a flowing gown turned her head. Just right, and for a split second he swore it was Camille standing there. He tried to reason with himself. She'll be fine without me. She's strong. She'll move on. Yet the thought didn't bring relief. It made his chest ache with something dangerously close to longing. He remembered their rooftop dinners before the night it all fell apart. He remembered her joy when she spoke of children, the light in her eyes when she imagined their future. He had shut that dream down, brutally. The guilt pressed heavier each time he recalled her broken whisper. "This isn't just about you, Preston. This is about us." More than once, he caught himself staring at children in public, toddlers, giggling in grocery stores, boys racing toy cars down sidewalks. The sight stirred an ache he couldn't name. He told himself it was curiosity, not regret. But deep down, he knew better. Work no longer numbed him as it once did. His achievements were stacked like skyscrapers, but they brought no comfort at night. Each deal he closed felt like sand slipping through his fingers, impressive but unable to fill the emptiness. One evening, Preston found himself driving aimlessly through Inglewood. He hadn't been there in years, but something drew him back. He slowed past the streets where Camille grew up, the church with its worn brick walls, the corner store where kids played, the houses with porches alive with laughter. He parked for a while, staring at the community that had shaped her. The sound of children laughing nearby twisted something in his chest. He imagined what it would have been like if he had chosen differently, if he had been beside Camille, if he had embraced fatherhood instead of rejecting it. He pictured her smile as she held their child's hand gripping his finger. The vision was so vivid that he closed his eyes, almost believing it was real. But when he opened them, he was alone in his car, the sound of his own breathing harsh against the silence. That night, as he returned to his glass fortress overlooking the ocean, Preston knew what was happening. The seeds of regret had been planted. They grew quietly but persistently, watered by every memory he tried to suppress. He had chosen power over family, control over love. And now, though he told no one, he felt the cost more deeply with each passing day. The hospital lobby was buzzing with its usual rhythm, patients waiting for appointments, families clutching coffee cups, nurses hurrying between shifts. But for Preston, time seemed to stop the moment his eyes landed on her. Camille. She was standing at the reception desk, her curls tied back, exhaustion and strength etched equally into her face. And beside her were two boys, no older than 6, their small hands gripping hers. Preston's breath caught in his throat. The boys looked so much like him, it felt like staring into a mirror he wasn't prepared for. He froze in place, unable to move, as his heart pounded in his chest. The noise of the lobby dulled, and all he could hear was the thundering question in his head, "Are they mine?" Camille turned slowly, as if sensing the weight of his gaze. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, years of silence came crashing down. Her lips parted, but instead of soft words, sharp steel cut through her voice. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Preston." Her tone wasn't affectionate, not even neutral. It was edged with hurt, carrying the weight of nights she had cried. Alone, the labor he had abandoned, the milestones he had missed. The boys looked up at her curiously, then at the tall man in the tailored suit, who suddenly seemed shaken. "Camille," Preston finally managed, his voice raw, stripped of the control he was so used to wielding. What are those?" She stepped forward, her shoulders squared. "Yes, these are my sons, our sons, Malik and Isaiah. And before you even ask, no, they don't need anything from you. They've grown up just fine without you." Her words struck like lightning, the truth undeniable. Preston's throat tightened as he glanced down at the boys again. Malik's chin was lifted with the same defiance Preston had carried into every boardroom. Isaiah's thoughtful eyes studied him the way Camille once had, as though searching for the truth beneath the exterior. For a moment, Preston couldn't speak. His world, the empire, the wealth, the carefully curated life, crumbled in the face of what stood before him. 2 sons he had never known, 2 lives that had unfolded without his presence. The lobby seemed to shrink around them. People passing by slowed, sensing tension but not daring to interrupt. Preston took a shaky step forward. "Camille, She shook her head, her voice low but fierce. Don't you dare say you didn't know. You made your choice years ago when I told you I was pregnant. You turned your back. So don't stand here acting surprised that life moved on without you." Every word pierced deeper than the last. Preston wanted to defend himself, to explain the fear that had gripped him, but the sight of the boys silenced every excuse. "Are they healthy?" he finally asked, his voice breaking. Camille's eyes narrowed. "They're thriving, and they're thriving because I chose to protect them from your rejection. They don't know your name, they don't know your face, and frankly, I don't know if they need to." The boys shifted beside her, sensing the intensity but not fully understanding it. Malik tugged at her hand. "Mama, who is he?" Her chest rose and fell with emotion. She glanced at them, then back at Preston. "He's someone from the past. That's all you need to know for now." Preston's heart cracked at the dismissal. Someone from the past. Was that all he had become? A ghost haunting the edges of their story? But as he looked again at Malik's determined gaze and Isaiah's questioning eyes, he knew this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. He had walked away once, yes, but standing in that hospital lobby, confronted with the undeniable truth of fatherhood, Preston realized he couldn't walk away again. Not this time. The air in the hospital lobby was thick, heavy with truths that could no longer be hidden. Camille's words had cut deep, but what shook Preston most was the way the boys stared at him, wide-eyed, curious, but distant. He cleared his throat, taking an unsteady step forward. "Hello," he said softly, his voice stripped of the confidence that usually carried it. I'm Preston." Malik tilted his head, his brows knitting together. "Mr. Preston." The title was innocent enough, but it carried the sting of separation. He wasn't Dad. He was just a stranger in a suit. Isaiah, quieter but sharper, studied him carefully. "Why do you look like us?" he asked, his tone more observation than question. Camille's heart clenched. She had prepared herself for this day, though she didn't know when it would come. She crouched beside them, her voice steady but tender. "Because he's someone important to your story, but you don't need to call him anything right now. Just Mr. Preston is fine." Preston's chest tightened. He had expected confusion, maybe even hostility, but hearing his own sons call him Mr. Preston felt like being locked out of his own home. They were his flesh and blood, yet they spoke to him with the formality reserved for strangers. Malik crossed his arms, a tiny mirror of Preston's own stubborn posture. "Do you know how to play basketball, Mr. Preston?" The question caught him off guard. I used to," Preston admitted. Malik's eyes narrowed skeptically. "Because you don't look like you play. You look like you sit in meetings all day." Camille bit back a laugh despite the tension. Malik's blunt honesty was pure, unfiltered. Preston almost smiled too, but the truth in his son's words cut deep. He had spent years sitting in meetings, chasing deals, while missing the milestones that mattered most. Isaiah, meanwhile, tugged gently at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, is he going to stay, or is he leaving again?" The question landed like a hammer. Camille's breath caught, and Preston's composure cracked. He crouched down, meeting Isaiah's eyes. "I don't want to leave," he whispered, his voice unsteady. "Not anymore." But Isaiah only blinked, uncertain, retreating closer to his mother. Camille straightened, her expression guarded. "You don't get to walk in here and rewrite history, Preston. They don't know you. They don't owe you anything." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try." The twins exchanged a look, one of those silent, wordless communications only siblings seem to understand. Malik shrugged, as though to say he didn't mind giving this stranger a chance. Isaiah, slower to trust, held back, his thoughtful eyes still fixed on Preston. Camille exhaled, torn. Part of her wanted to shield them, to block every attempt at connection. But another part, quieter yet persistent, wondered if maybe, just maybe, her sons deserved to know the man who had given them life, even if he had once turned his back. She finally said, "If you want to try, you'll start small. No promises, no grand speeches, just presence. We'll see what that looks like." Preston nodded gratefully, though the weight of Mr. Preston still pressed heavy on his heart. He knew regaining trust wouldn't be easy. These boys weren't waiting for a savior. They had their mother, their family, their community. But as he looked at their faces, so much of him, yet so much of her, he made a quiet vow he would earn his place, one moment at a time. The days following that tense hospital lobby encounter were uneasy. Preston lingered in Camille's mind more than she wanted, and for the twins, Mr. Preston had become a topic whispered about in their curious little voices. Preston, true to his word, began to show up. At first it was awkward, more awkward than he had ever felt in his entire life. He, a man who closed billion-dollar deals, couldn't figure out how to hold a juice box without spilling it on his $1,000 shoes. The first time he visited the boys at Camille's small apartment, Malik eyed him suspiciously. "Do you even know how to play Uno?" he asked, shuffling the colorful deck with exaggerated seriousness. Preston cleared his throat. "Of course I do." 10 minutes later, Malik was smirking across the table as he dropped his last card. "You lost, Mr. Preston, and you didn't even say Uno when you had one card left." Preston frowned, confused. "Wait, you're supposed to say it out loud." Isaiah laughed, a soft, surprised laugh that warmed Camille's heart from across the room. "Yes, you have to say it. Rules are rules." Preston chuckled sheepishly, raising his hands in surrender. All right, I'll do better next time." Next time came quickly. He showed up again 2 days later, this time in jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of a tailored suit. Malik dragged him outside to shoot hoops with a ball almost too worn to bounce properly. "Bet you can't make this shot," Malik challenged, pointing to the cracked pavement where they had chalked out a line. Preston took the ball, his movements stiff. It had been years since he'd touched a basketball. His first shot clanged off the rim. Malik burst out laughing, running circles around him. "I knew it. I knew you were all talk." But Preston didn't quit. He picked up the ball again, adjusted, and tried once more. The second shot went in, clean. Malik froze, then stomped his foot. That was luck. Isaiah, sitting on the curb, smiled quietly. Or maybe he practiced when he was younger. Camille watched from the porch, arms folded. Part of her wanted to laugh at Preston's fumbling attempts. Another part, the part that noticed the boys' laughter, the way Isaiah's eyes softened, and Malik's energy turned competitive rather than cold, couldn't deny something was shifting. Preston wasn't smooth about it. He asked too many questions at dinner. "Do you like math? What's your favorite subject?" He was conducting a job interview. He tripped over toys more times than Camille could count. Once, he burned pancakes so badly the smoke alarm shrieked, sending Malik into hysterics and Isaiah running to open windows. But he kept showing up. He played the games, even when he lost. He listened to Isaiah explain dinosaurs for 20 straight minutes, nodding as though each fact was a revelation. He let Malik boss him around on the basketball court, pretending to lose just to see his son's triumphant grin. Clumsy as he was, his persistence began to chip away at the walls. One evening, as Preston was leaving, Malik tugged on his sleeve. "You can come back tomorrow if you want." His tone was casual, but the invitation was monumental. Preston's throat tightened. He crouched down, meeting his son's eyes. "I'd like that very much." Camille, standing in the doorway, said nothing. Her heart was conflicted, torn between the instinct to protect and the evidence before her eyes. The boys weren't pushing him away. They were letting him in, little by little, because children often forgave faster than adults. And Preston? He was learning that fatherhood wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, one of those rare calm days when the apartment, smelled of cornbread, and the twins had been playing without bickering. Camille was folding laundry in the next room, while Preston sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping the boys assemble a sprawling puzzle of dinosaurs. Malik, impatient as ever, had already built half the picture and was now trying to convince Preston to race him at finishing the other half. Isaiah, slower and more deliberate, was turning each piece carefully, in his hands, scanning the edges before fitting them into place. "Mr. Preston," Isaiah said suddenly, without looking up, "why didn't you come before?" The question landed in the room like a thunderclap. Malik glanced up, sensing the shift. Camille, in the doorway with a basket of folded clothes, froze mid-step. Preston's fingers stilled on the puzzle piece he was holding. For weeks he had been preparing himself for this. He knew the question would come, maybe from Camille, maybe from the boys. But hearing it from Isaiah's small, thoughtful voice felt like a punch to the chest. He set the piece down slowly, his eyes moving from Isaiah's bent head to Camille's watchful face. "That's a fair question," he said, his voice lower than usual. Isaiah finally looked up, his dark eyes steady, not accusing but searching. "Mama said you were busy, but you weren't too busy to be at parties. We saw your picture on the news." Preston's heart cracked at the quiet truth. He had built an empire under the bright lights of the world, while his sons had grown up without his presence. No explanation would undo that. "I was scared," Preston admitted, his voice trembling. "I thought I wasn't ready. I thought if I stayed away, it would be easier for everyone. But I was wrong. I should have been here. I should have come before." The room held its breath. Malik shifted uncomfortably, looking from his brother to the man who was slowly dismantling his own armor. Isaiah didn't blink. "Were you scared of us?" Preston's throat tightened. "No, never of you. I was scared of myself. Scared I'd fail. Scared I'd be the kind of father I grew up with. The kind who's there, but not really there. I thought walking away would protect you from that. But I see now, it just hurt you instead." Camille felt her heart twist. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but hearing him say it aloud, no excuses, no deflection, hit differently. For the first time in years, she saw not just the CEO, but the broken boy who had built walls around himself and called it strength. Isaiah's eyes softened slightly. He reached for another puzzle piece, fitting it into place. "We're not mad," he said quietly. "We just didn't know why." Preston swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes. "You have every right to be mad, but I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I want to be here. Not just today, but every day I can." Malik frowned, arms crossed. "Does that mean you're going to start acting like a dad?" Preston's lips curved into a sad, hopeful smile. "I'd like to try, but I know I have to earn that. I don't expect you to call me anything. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere." The puzzle lay unfinished between them, but something else began to take shape. Something fragile, like the first bridge over a long distance. Camille, still silent, felt her chest ache. This was the moment she had dreaded and hoped for all at once, the question asked, the truth spoken, the door cracked open for healing. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to protect her boys. Both instincts warred inside her. But as she looked at Isaiah's thoughtful expression and Malik's guarded curiosity, she saw her sons making their own silent decisions. They weren't embracing him yet, but they were listening, and for now, that was enough. That night, after the twins had finally gone to bed, Camille found herself sitting across from Preston at the kitchen table. She hadn't invited him to stay. He had lingered quietly, as if waiting for permission to leave or to speak. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence until Camille finally asked the question weighing on her chest. "Why now, Preston? Why show up after all this time?" He looked down at his hands, fingers laced tightly together, the way he did in boardrooms when he was trying to keep control. But there was no control left in him tonight, just raw honesty. "Because the walls I built don't work anymore," he said slowly. "I spent years convincing myself I didn't need anyone, that if I just worked harder, if I just made more money, if I just stayed untouchable, I'd be safe. But every night when I went home, all I had was silence. And in that silence, I kept hearing your voice, seeing the life I walked away from. Camille's throat tightened, but she kept her expression steady. You made a choice. I told you I was pregnant, and you rejected not just me, but them. Fear doesn't excuse that. I know, Preston said quickly, his voice breaking. I know it doesn't. I wasn't rejecting you. I was rejecting the part of myself that believed I could ever be a father. My own dad. He paused, swallowing hard. My father was cold, distant. He gave me everything money could buy, but nothing I actually needed. I was terrified I'd become him. I thought walking away would protect the boys from that cycle. But it didn't. It just proved I became worse than him, because at least he stayed in the house. The confession cracked something open in him. His shoulders sagged, and for once there was no polished CEO, no man in control of every outcome. Just Preston, the flawed, broken man who had made choices he couldn't take back. Camille stared at him, her chest heavy. She had wanted him to admit the truth for years, to stop hiding behind excuses. Now that he was, the words didn't heal her instantly. But they reached somewhere deep, somewhere she had buried her hurt. Do you think words can undo the years I raised them alone? She asked, quietly. No, he admitted. Nothing I say can erase that, but I can show you. I can show them. I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I won't run again. His voice wavered. I'm tired of pretending I don't care. I do. I always did. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. Camille closed her eyes briefly, the ache inside her deepening. She thought of Malik's laugh, Isaiah's questions, the way they clung to her when they were scared. She thought of the nights she had sat in rocking chairs alone, whispering promises she shouldn't have had to make by herself. And now here he was, breaking down, finally admitting the fear she had always suspected but never heard from his lips. She opened her eyes again, her gaze steady. If you want to prove yourself, Preston, you'll have to show up for them consistently. Not for me, for them. No more disappearing, no more excuses, because they deserve better than empty promises. Preston nodded, his eyes glistening. I understand. For the first time in years, Camille saw his walls crack. The empire builder, the man who had once chosen ambition over family, sat before her undone, stripped of ego. It didn't erase the past, but it planted something, uncertain, fragile, yet real. Maybe, just maybe, the walls were coming down. That night, long after Preston had left, Camille sat in the quiet of her bedroom. Malik and Isaiah were fast asleep, their soft breathing steady in the stillness. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. For years, she had been both mother and father, provider and protector. Every choice she made had been with one goal in mind, shielding her boys from hurt. She had built a world for them where love was abundant, even if the presence of a father was missing. And she had promised herself, sworn to herself, that she would never allow Preston to break them the way he had once broken her. But now, she was faced with the unthinkable. Preston was back. He was trying. He was showing cracks in the armor she had once thought impenetrable. And worst of all, her sons were starting to notice. Malik had already bragged to his cousins that Mr. Preston came over to play basketball. Isaiah, thoughtful as ever, had quietly asked if he thought Mr. Preston might come back again. Those small sparks of hope in their voices made Camille's heart ache. She wanted to give them answers, but all she had were questions. Could she trust him? Could she let down the guard she had held up for so long? And if she did, would it heal her boys or destroy them? She thought back to the rooftop dinner years ago, the night her world had cracked. She remembered the way his voice had gone cold, the way he had chosen ambition over love. That memory was a wound she still carried. The idea of letting him close again, close to her heart, close to their sons, terrified her. Yet, she couldn't ignore what she had seen in recent weeks. Preston fumbling through Uno games. Preston missing shots on the basketball court but trying again. Preston kneeling to look Isaiah in the eye and admitting fear without excuses. Camille pressed her palms to her face, whispering into the silence. Lord, what do I do? Do I protect them from him, or do I give them the chance to know him? Her grandmother's words came back to her, spoken years ago when she first confessed. She was pregnant. Men may come and go, but children are forever. Camille had built her life on that truth. But now, it wasn't just about her anymore. Her sons were growing, asking questions, reaching for answers. Keeping Preston away might protect them from pain, but it might also rob them of something they deserved, a chance to know their father. The next day, as she watched Malik and Isaiah race across the park, their laughter echoing, Camille felt the conflict burn deeper. Malik's boldness reminded her of Preston's confidence. Isaiah's careful thoughtfulness mirrored the man's quieter side. They were his as much as they were hers. Could she deny that part of their identity forever? When Preston arrived later that week, bringing a box of books Isaiah had mentioned liking, Camille's guard went up instantly. But then she saw Isaiah's eyes light up as he carefully flipped through the pages, and Malik's grin when Preston agreed to a rematch on the court. Camille folded her arms, watching from the porch. Her instinct screamed at her to protect, to shield, to build walls higher. Yet another voice, softer but insistent, asked if maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. That night, she sat beside her boys as they drifted off to sleep. Malik whispered, half asleep, "Mama, Mr. Preston is funny." Isaiah added quietly, "He listens when I talk." Their words were simple, but they pierced her heart. Preston was no longer just a ghost from her past. He was becoming real to them. Camille lay awake for hours, her mind circling the same question. Should she shut the door completely and keep them safe, or should she risk everything by leaving it cracked open, letting him prove himself? There was no easy answer, only a mother's heart, torn between protection and hope. The week after Preston's first visits, Camille moved through her days in a haze of conflict. At work, she smiled for the teens at the non-profit. At home, she laughed with her boys as they raced through the apartment. But inside, her thoughts churned like a storm she couldn't silence. Preston kept showing up. He didn't come with grand speeches or extravagant gifts, just with his awkward attempts at being present. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he stayed late to help the boys with their schoolwork. Other times he simply sat on the floor, letting Malik crawl all over him during rough games or listening intently as Isaiah explained every detail about space exploration. Camille watched all of it carefully. She didn't miss the way Malik's guard lowered bit by bit, or how Isaiah leaned against Preston without realizing it. These small signs terrified her as much as they warmed her. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Camille stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights flickering in the distance. Preston lingered at the door, his hand on the knob as though waiting for her to send him away. "You're making it harder," she said softly, not looking at him. Preston frowned. "Harder?" "Yes." She turned, her voice trembling with honesty. "Harder to keep the walls up, harder to protect them from disappointment. They're starting to look at you differently, Preston. They're starting to hope. And I don't know if I can let them." Preston's jaw tightened. "Camille, I don't expect you to trust me yet. I know I failed you, but I want to show them something different now. I don't want to be the ghost you painted me as. I want to be here, not perfect, just here." Her eyes softened despite herself. "That's the thing. You're here today, but will you be here tomorrow, next month, next year? That's what terrifies me." Preston stepped closer, his voice low. "Then hold me to it. Watch me. Don't believe my words, believe my actions. I know I can't erase the years I missed, but I want to make sure I don't miss the ones ahead." Camille's breath caught. For the first time, she didn't hear the rehearsed tone of a businessman making a pitch. She heard something raw, something desperate, something real. Still, the fear lingered. She folded her arms, turning back toward the window. "We'll see." Preston didn't argue. He simply nodded, whispered goodnight, and left quietly. When the door clicked shut, Camille pressed her hand to her chest, whispering into the silence, "Lord, if this is you trying to heal what was broken, give me the courage to let it happen. And if it's not, protect my boys." The next morning, Malik bounced into the kitchen, declaring, "Mr. Preston said he's going to beat me at basketball this weekend." Isaiah chimed in. He promised he'd bring the book about planets. Their excitement was so pure, so unguarded, that Camille didn't have the heart to temper it. She smiled, but inside, her dilemma deepened. Her sons were opening the door faster than she was. And once children open their hearts, there's no closing them again. This chapter in their lives was just beginning, but already the stakes were higher than ever. Preston wasn't just fighting for her trust, he was fighting for theirs. Now let me ask you, family, what would you do in Camille's place? Would you protect your children and keep their father at a distance, or would you allow the possibility of healing, even if it means risking disappointment? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspective matters. And if you believe in second chances, drop a heart in the comments. Show us how powerful forgiveness and redemption can be. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Mr. Comfort Stories for more inspiring tales just like this. Because sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations, and sometimes even after rejection, love finds its way back home. The first test of Preston's determination came quickly. It wasn't enough to play Uno on Camille's living room floor or shoot hoops on cracked pavement. If he truly wanted to prove himself, he had to step into the boys' everyday world, into the spaces where fathers were supposed to stand without applause or recognition. It began at school. Camille had warned him not to make promises he couldn't keep, so when Preston told the twins he'd attend their parent-teacher night, she raised a brow but said nothing. Malik and Isaiah, however, clung to that promise with wide-eyed excitement. On the evening of the event, Camille almost expected him not to show, but as she walked the halls of the elementary school, holding her son's hands, she saw him waiting outside the classroom door. No tailored suit this time, just a simple button-down and slacks, his hair slightly tousled, his nerves visible. Malik beamed. "See? I told you he'd come." Inside the classroom, Preston listened intently as the teacher praised Isaiah's curiosity and Malik's boundless energy. He asked questions not about grades or future prospects, but about how he could support them better at home. When the teacher mentioned Malik sometimes rushed through his work, Preston crouched beside him and said softly, "Slow and steady wins, champ. Don't just race, learn." Malik nodded, grinning like he'd been given a secret key. Isaiah's teacher shared how he often stayed behind after class to ask deeper questions. Preston's chest swelled with pride. "That's my boy," he whispered. Camille heard it, and though she kept her face neutral, something stirred inside her. The next step came at the twins' school recital. Camille dressed them in matching white shirts and bow ties, her heart already tender at the sight of them. She hadn't told Preston. She didn't want to risk him disappointing the boys if he failed to come. But halfway through the crowded auditorium, she caught sight of him slipping into the back row, bouquet of flowers in hand. When Malik and Isaiah spotted him from the stage, their faces lit up so brightly Camille had to look away for a moment. After the performance, Preston bent down, handing each boy a flower from the bouquet. "For the stars of the show," he said proudly. Malik laughed, hugging him around the neck, while Isaiah whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Preston," clutching his flower like a treasure. But perhaps the true measure of his integration came at Camille's family cookout. It had been years since Preston had stood in her family's yard, surrounded by cousins, uncles, aunties and neighbors who guarded Camille fiercely. Camille was reluctant, but her mother nudged her gently. "If the boys are letting him in, maybe we need to see for ourselves." So one Saturday afternoon, Preston found himself walking into a backyard filled with the aroma of ribs and cornbread, laughter echoing from card tables, and music pulsing from old speakers. He carried a cooler of sodas, feeling more nervous than he had at any corporate board meeting. Her uncles were waiting, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Malik dragged him straight to the spades table. "Uncle Roy, Mr. Preston knows how to play, right?" Malik grinned mischievously, daring Preston to prove himself. Preston chuckled nervously. "Let's just say I'm learning Her grandmother eyed him from her lawn chair, the same way she had years ago. After a long silence, she finally said, "We'll see if you last longer this time." Her words stung, but they also carried a challenge Preston was determined to meet. Throughout the afternoon, he endured playful teasing, questions about his intentions, and skeptical stares. But he also flipped burgers on the grill, chased Malik across the yard in a makeshift football game, and sat quietly with Isaiah as the boy explained why the clouds looked different than usual. Camille watched from a distance, her heart a battlefield. Seeing him there, sweating over the grill, laughing as Malik tackled him, leaning in to truly listen to Isaiah, it was like looking at the version of him she had once dreamed of, the version she had prayed for years ago. By the end of the night, even her uncles begrudgingly nodded at him. Her grandmother, while not offering approval, didn't dismiss him outright, and Camille's mother whispered as they cleaned up, "He's trying. Don't close your eyes to that." For the first time in years, Preston wasn't just Mr. Preston. He was becoming part of the boys' lives, in school, on stage, and at family tables. Step by step, awkward and imperfect, he was beginning to carve a place where once there had been none. Camille had always believed actions spoke louder than words. She had heard enough apologies and promises in her life to know they meant little without consistency. So when Preston began appearing in the everyday rhythms of her sons' lives, she kept her guard up but her eyes open. The first time she noticed a real change was on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Malik had forgotten his lunch at home, something he often did in his rush to race Isaiah to the car. Camille was stuck in a meeting at the non-profit, stress mounting, when her phone buzzed with the text, "I've got Malik covered. Don't worry." She didn't believe it until Malik came home that evening, chattering excitedly. "Mama, Mr. Preston brought me lunch. He even sat with me at the table, and the other kids kept asking if he was my uncle or something. He said, 'No, I'm family.'" The pride in Malik's voice was undeniable. Camille tried to hide her surprise, but inside, something shifted. Preston hadn't called to brag or waited until later to mention it. He had simply stepped in when he was needed. Another moment came at Isaiah's science fair. Camille had prepared herself to juggle both boys alone, Isaiah presenting his project about planets, while Malik bounced around impatiently. But Preston showed up early, carrying a clipboard of his own. "Thought I could help," he said quietly. Isaiah's eyes lit up when Preston bent down to look at his poster. "You spelled Jupiter right," Preston teased gently, pointing at the carefully drawn letters. "That's more than I could have done at your age." Isaiah grinned, adjusting his glasses. Later that night, he whispered to Camille before bed, "Mr. Preston really listened to me today. Not everyone does." Camille felt her throat tighten. She kissed his forehead and turned off the light, but her heart was anything but calm. At home, Preston's presence grew in small, practical ways. He fixed the leaky faucet in her kitchen without being asked. He figured out how to assemble the shelf Camille had been putting off. When Malik fell and scraped his knee, Preston knelt in the driveway, cleaning the cut with surprising gentleness, while Camille stood back, silently watching the tenderness she once believed he wasn't capable of. There were stumbles, too. He forgot Isaiah's favorite snack once, and Malik scolded him mercilessly for missing a basketball rematch. But each mistake was followed by persistence, showing up again, trying harder, refusing to disappear. Camille found herself observing him in quiet moments. She saw the way Isaiah leaned against his shoulder during story time, how Malik rolled his eyes at him one second and laughed with him the next. She caught the look in Preston's eyes when the boys called out for Mama, and not for him, a flicker of pain, quickly masked, but real. It was during one of those nights, after the boys had gone to sleep, that Camille stood in the doorway and watched him. He was on the floor of the living room, picking up Legos Malik had left scattered everywhere. His broad shoulders looked smaller somehow, less imposing, as if the act of humbling himself before ordinary fatherly tasks was reshaping him. She crossed her arms. "You don't have to do that, you know." Preston glanced up, his expression soft. "I know. But I want to—" Simple words. No grand speech, no dramatic declaration. Just a choice made quietly. Camille lingered there for a moment longer than she intended, her defenses wavering. These weren't sweeping victories that proved everything would be fine, but they were wins, the kind that came from showing up, the kind that built trust brick by brick. And though she didn't say it aloud, Camille felt something stirring in her, not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of possibility. It started with the little things. Camille hadn't planned for it, hadn't even wanted it, but proximity has a way of softening edges. The more Preston showed up, the harder it became to see him only as the man who once left. One Friday evening, after a long week, Camille hosted a small dinner for her non-profit staff. The boys sat at the kids' table, laughing over jokes only they understood, while Preston helped in the kitchen without needing to be asked. He chopped vegetables, washed dishes, and carried trays with a competence she didn't know he had. At one point, their hands brushed as they both reached for a pot. Camille froze, startled at the spark that surged between them. Preston pulled back quickly, his gaze lingering on her longer than it should have. For a moment, it felt like time stretched out, the noise of the dinner fading into the background. Later that night, when everyone left and the boys were asleep, Camille stood on the balcony, the city lights flickering beneath her. She heard the sliding door open and knew without looking that it was him. "You did good tonight," Preston said softly, stepping beside her. "Your team. They look at you like you're the anchor holding them together." Camille smiled faintly, her arms folded across her chest. "They work hard. They deserve the best of me." He glanced sideways at her, his expression gentle but weighted. "I used to think power was about boardrooms and contracts. But watching you, I realize real power is what you have, making people feel safe, seen, believed in." Her heart thudded unexpectedly. She tried to ignore the warmth in his words, the sincerity etched into his tone. "Preston," he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I broke something sacred, but when I'm here, when I see the way you smile at the boys, the way you fight for everyone you love, it makes me want to fight too. For you, for them, for us." Camille turned toward him then, the city glow reflecting in her eyes. She wanted to push him away, to remind him of the pain he had caused, but instead she found herself whispering, "You talk like you've changed." "I have," he said, almost a plea. "Not overnight, not perfectly, but every day I show up is proof I'm not the same man who walked away." The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken memories. Finally she sighed, looking down at her hands. "Change isn't enough. Consistency is what matters." Preston reached out slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to step back. When his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. His touch was warm, grounding, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. For the first time in years, she let him hold her hand. They didn't kiss that night. There were no grand fireworks, no dramatic declarations. Instead, there was something more intimate, standing side by side on the balcony, their fingers intertwined, the weight of the past pressing against the fragile hope of the future. Over the following weeks, moments like that multiplied. Camille found herself laughing at his dry humor, the kind she had forgotten she once loved. He lingered longer at the door, after tucking the boys in, their good night, hugs spilling over into shared glances between her and him. One evening, when Malik insisted they all play charades, Camille ended up laughing so hard she leaned against Preston for balance. She realized only after the game ended that she hadn't pulled away immediately. And then came the night when rain poured heavy against the windows. The power flickered out, and the apartment was bathed in soft candlelight. The boys had fallen asleep on the couch after a movie, leaving Camille and Preston in a rare cocoon of quiet. Camille reached for a blanket to drape over the twins, and Preston moved at the same time. Their hands collided, but instead of pulling away, Preston held on. Their eyes met, the air between them charged. He didn't rush. He simply searched her face, as though waiting for permission. This time, Camille didn't say no. She didn't push him back into the shadows of the past. She let herself lean in, just enough that when their foreheads touched, a quiet shiver of recognition ran through both of them. The kiss that followed was gentle, reverent, filled not with lust but with longing. It was the kiss of two people who had broken and bled and somehow found themselves back in each other's orbit. When they pulled apart, breathless but steady, Camille whispered, "Don't make me regret this." Preston pressed her hand against his chest, over the steady rhythm of his heart. Not this time. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't a new beginning sealed and certain, but it was a spark, one neither of them could deny anymore. The first headlines arrived on a Monday morning. Camille was packing the boys' lunches when her phone buzzed with an alert. Preston Hale's tech firm under scrutiny for accounting irregularities. Her heart lurched. She clicked through the article, scanning lines about whistleblowers, investigations, and rumors of misconduct within the finance division of his company. By the time she reached the end, Malik and Isaiah were asking why she looked so pale. She brushed it off, but deep down fear pricked at her. Preston's empire had always looked untouchable, gleaming towers of glass, contracts signed in rooms filled with power. Now, that foundation looked shakier than she could have imagined. When Preston arrived that evening to see the boys, Camille met him at the door with crossed arms. "Tell me it's not true." His face was grim, jaw tight. "It's complicated. There are people on the board who don't like the changes I've been making. They think I've gone soft, that spending less time at the office means I've lost control." "And have you?" she asked sharply. Preston shook his head. "No. The numbers are clean, Camille, but they're twisting things to make it look like I'm distracted, like caring about my family means I'm not fit to run what I built." It wasn't just gossip. Within days, news stations ran endless commentary. Stocks dipped. Shareholders demanded answers. The board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting. Preston, who had once walked into boardrooms with unshakable confidence, now felt the weight of eyes judging him not just as a CEO but as a man who had dared to change. Camille saw it firsthand when she accompanied him to a meeting at his request, in a room filled with sharp suits and sharper tongues. Board members questioned everything from his leadership style to his distractions. "You've been seen at school events, at community cookouts, at family gatherings," one director sneered. "That's time away from the company. Investors are worried. Priorities matter, Preston." Preston's knuckles whitened on the table. "My priorities are still here. I've built this company from the ground up. But for once in my life, I'm not going to sacrifice everything else on the altar of success." His words silenced the room for a moment. But Camille could tell his defiance didn't calm their doubts. It only deepened them. When they left the meeting, Preston exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "They're circling, Camille. They smell weakness." She studied him, torn between anger and compassion. "This is the cost of change, Preston. You can't be half a father and half a businessman forever. At some point, the two lives collide." Her words struck him harder than the board's accusations. The days that followed were grueling. Reporters camped outside his office. Former rivals resurfaced, eager to exploit the scandal. The stock dropped further, forcing Preston to work late into the night on damage control. But this time, something was different. He didn't vanish from Camille and the boys' lives, even if he came straight from the office in wrinkled shirts and with exhaustion written across his face. He showed up. He still helped with homework, still attended Malik's basketball games, still made time for Isaiah's endless space trivia. It was messy and imperfect, but it was proof. Camille noticed. One night, after Malik had drifted to sleep and Isaiah was tucked in with a book, she found Preston sitting on the couch, head in his hands. His phone buzzed with emails he ignored. "You're breaking yourself in two," she murmured. He looked up, eyes weary but determined. "I've spent years breaking myself into one thing only, the CEO. Maybe this is what it looks like to finally balance it out." For the first time since the scandal began, Camille's chest ached not with anger but with admiration. She saw a man fighting battles on two fronts, for his empire and for his family. And though she didn't say it aloud, she knew which one mattered more to her. The storm broke harder than anyone expected. The scandal that had started as whispers in the press ballooned into a full-blown media circus. Analysts on television dissected every move Preston made, questioning his leadership. Blogs speculated about his downfall, and headlines shouted about potential lawsuits. For Camille, it was surreal. This was the man who once seemed untouchable, whose empire looked like steel and glass towers immune to cracks. Now she watched him stagger under the weight of scrutiny, fighting to hold on to what he had built while refusing to abandon the life he was trying to reclaim with his family. At first, she tried to keep her distance. After all, this was his fight, not hers. But the more she saw, the more involved she became. One morning, she arrived at the boys' school for drop-off and spotted Preston leaning against his car, phone pressed to his ear. His tie was loose, his expression strained. She caught fragments of his conversation, directors threatening a vote of no confidence, investors demanding his removal. He hung up and caught her staring. For a moment, pride flickered across his face, the old instinct to mask vulnerability. But it faded quickly, replaced by something raw. "I'm losing them," he admitted quietly. Camille hesitated, then asked, "What are you going to do?" His answer was firm, though his voice trembled. "Fight. Even if I'm standing alone in that boardroom, I'm not letting them rewrite my story." It was the first time she realized how much courage it took to stand in the middle of chaos and not retreat into old habits. Later that week, Preston asked her to accompany him again to a shareholders' meeting. Camille wasn't sure what unnerved her more, the sharp stares of investors or the fact that Preston wanted her by his side. The meeting was brutal. Questions hurled at him like stones, numbers challenged, priorities mocked. One director even sneered. Perhaps Mr. Hale should consider stepping aside to focus on his domestic responsibilities. The words dripped with disdain, as though family was a weakness rather than a strength. Preston's jaw flexed. He didn't lash out. He didn't storm from the room. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and replied evenly, "For years, I believed being a CEO meant being a machine, sacrificing relationships, love, and family for the sake of profit. Yes, I spend more time at home now. Yes, I show up for school recitals and basketball games. And yes, I care about my sons. But if you think that makes me weaker, you've misunderstood leadership. Because the man I am at home, the father, the partner, that man makes me stronger in this room. And if you can't see that, maybe I built this empire for the wrong people." The room went still. Camille's heart pounded as she sat beside him, witnessing a man who was not begging for approval but standing in conviction. When they left the meeting, she couldn't hide the emotion in her eyes. "You didn't flinch," she murmured. "I wanted to," he admitted. "But then I thought about Malik watching me at his game, or Isaiah asking me questions I can't ignore. If I let these people scare me into silence, what kind of example would I set?" For the first time, Camille felt something shift inside her. This wasn't the Preston who had abandoned her at a rooftop dinner years ago, terrified of fatherhood. This was a man willing to risk his empire for the sake of being present, of being real. That night, as she tucked the boys into bed, Camille found herself whispering a prayer. "Lord, if this is the storm meant to test him, give him the strength to endure, and give me the wisdom to see him as he truly is now, not as he was before." For the first time in years, she no longer looked at Preston as a man defined by his mistakes. She saw him as a man being refined by fire. And that realization frightened her almost as much as it gave her hope. The scandal surrounding Preston didn't just live in boardrooms or headlines. It spilled into the everyday lives of Camille and the twins. At school, whispers traveled quickly. Parents gossiped at drop-off, their voices low but not low enough. "Isn't that the man from the news?" Some murmured, "The one accused of fraud." Others shook their heads, as if Preston's very presence was something scandalous the children should be shielded from. It didn't take long for the boys to feel the sting. One afternoon, Camille got a call from the principal's office. Her heart pounded as she walked through the front doors, only to find Malik and Isaiah sitting side by side, arms crossed, defiant expressions on their faces. Preston was already there, standing near the wall, his own jaw tight. "What happened?" Camille asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The principal sighed, adjusting her glasses. There was an incident on the playground. Some of the other children repeated things they overheard their parents saying. They called Mr. Hale a cheater and said the twins' father was going to jail. Camille's chest tightened, but before she could speak, Malik jumped in. "We told them that's not true. Our dad didn't cheat anyone. He's honest, and he's strong, and he's not going anywhere." Isaiah added fiercely, "Yeah, just because people talk on TV doesn't mean they know him. He's not like that. He's our dad." The words rang in the air, heavy with conviction. Camille froze, stunned. Her boys had never spoken about Preston like that before. Not with such certainty, not with such pride. The principal cleared her throat. Unfortunately, words escalated to shoving. "That's why we had to bring everyone in." Preston finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I'll handle this." He crouched in front of Malik and Isaiah, looking them in the eye. "I'm proud of you for standing up for me, but I also need you to remember, fighting with your fists doesn't solve things. We have to fight with truth, with patience. You hear me?" Malik's eyes glistened. "But they were wrong about you." "I know," Preston said softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "And hearing you say what you just said, that means more to me than anything those headlines ever could. But the best way to prove them wrong is to keep showing the kind of people we are. That's how we win." Isaiah sniffled, his small fists clenched. "We just wanted them to know you're not bad." Preston hugged both boys tightly, his voice thick. "You've already shown them. You've shown me. You don't know how much that means." Camille stood back, watching the scene unfold with tears threatening at the edges of her eyes. She had spent years fearing Preston would break their sons' hearts. But in this moment, it was clear the boys didn't just see him as Mr. Preston anymore. They saw him as their father, and they were willing to fight for him the way he was fighting for them. After the meeting, as they walked out of the school together, Malik proudly held Preston's hand while Isaiah walked close on his other side. Camille followed, her emotions tangled. For so long, she had tried to shield her sons from disappointment, from false hope. But now, she saw something different. Her boys weren't weak or naive. They were strong, resilient, and fiercely loyal, because Preston had begun to show them what it meant to fight with love, even under fire. That night, Camille overheard Malik praying before bed. "God, please help Dad with his job stuff. Don't let people be mean to him. We know he's trying." Isaiah chimed in, whispering from the other bed, "Yeah, please make people see who he really is." Camille stood in the hallway, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. The twins' loyalty wasn't blind, it was born from what they had witnessed. Preston, for all his flaws, was proving himself not just to Camille, but to the two people whose opinion mattered most. And in that moment, Camille realized something she had been afraid to admit. Her sons weren't just defending their father. They were showing her how deeply love had already taken root. The scandal dragged on for weeks, but instead of tearing them apart, it wove them closer together. Camille hadn't expected that. She thought the pressure would expose Preston's old habits, the man who once ran from responsibility when life became too heavy. But instead, she saw the opposite. When Malik came home with bruised pride from the playground incident, Preston was there, sitting cross-legged on the floor to help him work through his feelings. When Isaiah stayed up too late worrying about whether Dad would still have a job, Preston tucked him in and assured him that no matter what happened in the boardroom, nothing could change how much he loved them. For Camille, the real turning point came one rainy evening. She was exhausted after a long day, her patience stretched thin. The boys had been restless, the phones kept buzzing with reporters, and her mind ached with questions about the future. Preston noticed. He sent the boys to their room with a gentle promise of story time later, and then quietly picked up the kitchen towel from her hand. "Sit down," he told her. She blinked at him, startled. "What? You've been carrying everything today. Let me carry something for you." Before she could argue, he took over the dishes, humming softly while the water ran. Camille sat at the table, too tired to protest. She watched him move, focused, steady, uncomplaining, and realized this was The same man who once claimed he couldn't handle the weight of a family. Now, he was choosing to shoulder burdens, both big and small. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a rooftop dinner or a bouquet of roses. But it was something stronger, proof in action. When he finally sat across from her, their eyes met in a silence that said more than words. "I used to think forgiveness was about pretending the past never happened," Camille whispered. "But maybe it's about seeing who someone becomes after the past." Preston's throat worked as he swallowed. "If that's true, then all I ask is that you keep looking at me. Because every day, I want to be a better man than I was yesterday. For you, for them." Her heart clenched, a war still raging inside her. But for the first time in years, forgiveness didn't feel impossible. It felt within reach. Later that weekend, they attended church together. Camille hadn't invited him. Preston asked on his own. Sitting beside her and the boys in the wooden pews, he bowed his head during the prayer, his large hands clasped tightly, lips moving silently. Camille stole a glance at him, her chest tightening at the sight. The boys leaned against him, one on each side, as if it had always been that way. When the service ended, Malik tugged on Camille's sleeve. "Mama, did you see Dad praying?" She smiled faintly, brushing his curls. "Yes, baby, I saw." That night, Preston joined them for dinner. The conversation wasn't about the scandal or the board or even forgiveness. It was about Malik's basketball shot, Isaiah's science project, and Camille's latest work at the non-profit. Laughter filled the table, rich and unforced. And as she cleared plates afterward, Camille paused at the kitchen doorway, watching Preston lean back in his chair as the boys climbed onto his lap. The man who once left was here, messy, imperfect, but present. The scars of the past were still there, but the sharpness of their edges had begun to dull. The walls Camille had built so carefully didn't crumble all at once, but a door had cracked open. Forgiveness hadn't arrived fully formed, but for the first time, she could feel it on the horizon, waiting. The conference room, perched high above Wilshire, felt colder than usual, as if the glass walls themselves had picked a side. Directors lined the table with binders and legal pads, a row of pens laid out like instruments for a careful autopsy. Cameras weren't allowed, but the outside world had already decided it wanted a spectacle. Preston arrived without an entourage, no PR handler, no attorney to answer for him. Just a folder, a clipped tie, and a steadying breath he took before the door shut behind him. Camille hadn't come this time. She was home with the boys. But before he left the apartment that morning, Isaiah had pressed a tiny sticker into his hand, a cartoon planet with a smiling face. "For courage," Isaiah said. Malik had added, "Win." The chair of the board began without preamble. "Mr. Hale, we've reviewed the internal reports. Regardless of whether accounting issues are malicious or negligent, markets don't care about nuance. Investors need certainty. As such, a resolution is on the table for your temporary removal, while an interim CEO takes over." A few heads nodded. One director leaned forward. "You can avoid the vote if you step aside now. Take a family sabbatical, let us stabilize the ship, and return later in a limited role." There it was, the exit disguised as grace. Preston looked down at the sticker on his folder. A planet, smiling, as if unafraid of gravity. He stood. "I built this company from a rented office with carpet squares that curled at the edges," he said evenly. "When servers crashed at 2 a.m., I slept on the floor. When an early client couldn't pay, I kept them anyway because their tool helped kids with reading. I remember every hire, every leap, every time we chose purpose over easy money." A director cut in, bored. "And now your distractions." "My priorities," Preston corrected. "You call them distractions because you only measure profit. I measure consequence. I won't apologize for learning how to be present for my sons." A murmur surged around the table. The chair tapped a pen. "This isn't about your domestic life. It's about control." Preston nodded slowly. "Exactly. Control is what made me think I could postpone becoming a decent man until after the next milestone. Control is what let me justify every absence, Control told me I could buy peace with success. It was a lie. He let that sit. One of the newer directors watched him closely, as if seeing a different person than the headlines described. Preston opened his folder and slid a packet across the table. Independent audit, commissioned by me. No pressure on the team, no interference. It clears the finance division of fraud. There are process faults, mine to own, but no theft, no deception. The chair barely glanced at the first page. Regardless, investor confidence has weakened. We need a figurehead who won't attract controversy. There's your real truth, Preston said quietly. You don't want a leader who shows up at a second-grade recital. You want a brand. Silence. I could ask you to wait out the news cycle. I could promise to return to 70-hour weeks and trade pickups for planes. He shook his head. But I won't. Not anymore. The room stiffened. Are you resigning? Someone asked, almost hopeful. Preston's answer was calm. I'm choosing my family. If that costs me this title, then today I lay it down. The words landed like a gavel. One director scoffed, another smiled thinly in triumph. But not everyone looked pleased. A few stared at the audit packet, as if realizing they'd just pushed out the founder, who still had a clean spine. The chair cleared her throat. The board accepts your resignation, effective immediately. We will proceed with naming an interim CEO. Preston closed his folder. For a second, a flicker of grief crossed his face, not for money, but for years of sweat that no longer needed him. He let the feeling move through him and out. Then he straightened, nodded once, and left the room as steadily as he'd entered. In the elevator, he looked again at Isaiah's sticker. The chrome doors reflected a different man than the one who used to ride down after midnight, high on metrics and low on meaning. He stepped out into the lobby, and into the hot Los Angeles afternoon, where noise and life spilled together. His phone buzzed with messages from journalists he ignored. He sent one text instead, to Camille, headed home. Tell the boys I kept my promise. He didn't know what would happen to the company he'd built. He did know what would happen at 6 p.m. Homework, dinner, a basketball rematch. He'd promised Malik, and a new library book Isaiah couldn't wait to show him. For the first time, the next meeting on his calendar felt like the most important one he'd ever attend. He slipped the sticker into his wallet. For courage, he whispered, smiling despite the loss. Then he drove toward the life he had finally chosen. 3 weeks after the standoff, the house had a rhythm that belonged to all four of them. It wasn't glamorous. It was better. Mondays, he handled drop-off. Camille didn't ask. He showed up at 7:15, coffee in one hand and a plastic folder in the other with spelling lists and permission slips he'd printed and hole-punched like an eager intern. Malik leapt down the steps 2 at a time, backpack half-zipped. Isaiah double-checked his lunchbox, adding a note Preston had started leaving. You've got this, star kid. Tuesdays and Thursdays were practice nights at the park. Malik insisted his father rebound every shot, even the wild ones that bounced toward the street. Hustle, old man, he yelled with delight. Preston dutifully chased each miss, laughing even when he tripped over the crack by the curb. Isaiah kept time on the bench, calling out imaginary commentators, play-by-play with a seriousness that made the other parents grin. Wednesdays, the library. Preston learned how to request holds, how to pay $8 in overdue fines without looking, embarrassed, and how to listen closely when Isaiah explained why a dwarf planet still mattered. He sat cross-legged between his sons on the carpet of the children's section while Camille watched from behind a shelf, arms folded, eyes softer than before. Fridays, family dinner. Sometimes they cooked together, Camille seasoning chicken while Malik whisked a sauce vigorously, and Isaiah arranged vegetables in rainbow order because patterns pleased him. Other nights they ordered takeout and ate on the floor picnic style. Preston washed dishes without being asked. Camille still caught herself wanting to say, "You don't have to," and still he answered, "I know." There were logistics to learn. Nurse visits, teacher emails about a class project, the art of coaxing 2 excited boys into church clothes without a meltdown. He learned to keep extra snacks in the glove box, a spare pair of basketball socks in his trunk, and quarters for. The ice cream truck that always arrived 5 minutes before bedtime in a conspiracy against parents everywhere. He also learned to show up when it was inconvenient. A field trip permission form forgot to make it into a backpack. He drove across town to hand it to Isaiah's teacher with a sheepish smile. Malik's team needed another adult to supervise a Saturday scrimmage. He spent 4 hours tying laces, stopping minor arguments and cheering for kids who weren't his, then drove home sunburned and happy. The twins began to trust in simple ways. Malik started leaving his favorite cap on Preston's passenger seat for luck. Isaiah, cautious about new routines, began asking, "Are you coming tomorrow too?" and relaxing when he heard, "Yes." They didn't call him Dad yet. They didn't have to. Their bodies leaned his way when they were tired. Their stories flowed toward him at the end of the day without prompting. Trust is a door that opens, not with a key, but with repetition that never breaks. Preston found work again, consulting for a smaller firm that valued his experience without demanding his soul. It paid less. He kept the car but downsized his lifestyle. The penthouse went on the market. He chose a bright apartment 10 minutes from Camille's place, with a small balcony just big enough for 2 folding chairs and a pot of basil Isaiah insisted on watering daily. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, his phone buzzed with a calendar reminder he'd added himself. Read Chapter 7 with Isaiah. Practice free throws with Malik. Call Mom. That last one took courage, but he made the call, the conversation halting, 2 people learning to speak without old shields. He hung up, surprised by a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Steadiness doesn't look heroic from the outside. It looks like arriving 5 minutes early and keeping your word. It looks like standing at the edge of a crowded cafeteria so a kid can find your face. It looks like reading the same page again because your son likes the sound of Saturn's rings described aloud. It looks like learning when to say no to the old life so you can say yes to the new one, day after day. One evening, while they wrapped leftovers, Camille caught him humming the silly song Malik's coach used for warm-ups. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're in deep," she said. He grinned. "I am." She didn't answer, but her eyes said she knew. Camille had promised herself she wouldn't be rushed by charm or guilt or nostalgia. Progress deserved recognition. Trust deserved safeguards. She held both. They met at the kitchen table one night after the twins were asleep, a legal pad, between them and 2 mugs of peppermint tea sending up faint ribbons of steam. This wasn't romance. This was stewardship. "I see the change," she began, fingers resting lightly on the pen. "I see the mornings, the practices, the meetings you didn't miss. I see the way they look for you now. That matters." He listened, hands open on the table, not defending himself with accomplishments. "Thank you," he said simply. "And," she added, steady, "I need clear agreements. Not because I doubt your intentions, but because structure keeps all of us safe." She slid the legal pad toward him. Pickups, overnights, holidays, doctor visits, school decisions. "If we're doing this, we're doing it with clarity." He read each line, nodding, "Yes to all. If I have to travel, I'll give notice a week ahead. If I'm late, I tell you immediately. If I can't do something I committed to, I find a replacement. Mom, your sister or I reschedule so the boys aren't disappointed." Her mouth twitched. "You've been taking notes." "I've been learning," he corrected gently. They talked through finances without drama, through boundaries with the calm that comes from shared purpose. They agreed on a cadence for family dinners and a rule for conflict, no raised voices in front of the boys. If a conversation heated, they'd pause, breathe, try again. When the papers were typed and signed, Camille felt a quiet relief. Not because she wanted to control him, but because this safety net had never existed before. She had carried everything alone. Now, she didn't have to. Acknowledging change didn't mean handing back the keys to her heart. She kept her inner world guarded, not locked, windows cracked, door latched but not deadbolted. When Preston reached for her hand at the twins' game, she didn't pull away. When he offered to fix a cabinet, she accepted. When his voice softened late at night and the distance between them felt small, she drew a line she could live with. "We take this slow." They honored that line. Some evenings ended with shared laughter by the sink and a warm goodbye at the door. Others ended with a hug longer than either expected, a quiet look that promised nothing and everything. He never pressed. She never punished. They let honest timing do the work. Camille's friends had questions. Some were protective, ready to pounce at the first misstep. Others were openly hopeful. She told all of them the truth. He's different. I'm different too. The boys come first, most important. She told herself the same truth when old fear tried to disguise itself as wisdom. One afternoon, she found a note tucked into the twins' reading log. Preston had written it to the teacher, "Thank you for unlocking their love of stories. You're part of our village." The pronoun caught her breath, not my sons, not her sons, but our, used with care, not ownership. She didn't text him about it. She just folded the note and kept it in a drawer. Forgiveness, she realized, isn't a switch. It's a doorway you approach more than once, checking the hinges, testing the handle, stepping in and out until the light inside feels trustworthy. She wasn't inside yet, but she was closer than before, and the air from that room felt warm. That weekend, when the boys ran ahead toward the park, Preston slowed to walk beside her. "Thank you for giving me the chance to become someone I should have been all along," he said. She glanced up, searching his face. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's been years and you're still here." He nodded. "Deal." They reached the swings where Malik yelled, "Push me higher," and Isaiah announced, "Saturn could float in water if you had a tub big enough." Camille laughed. Preston did too. The sound braided without effort. Measured didn't mean cold. Cautious didn't mean closed. In the balance between boundaries and belief, something living had begun to take root. The night the air turned warm enough to sit outside without jackets, the twins fell asleep, early, worn out from a day of sprinting up and down the hill behind the church. Camille stepped onto the small porch with 2 glasses of lemonade, then paused when she saw Preston already there, elbows on his knees, looking out at the quiet street. "Didn't hear you come out," she said, easing into the chair beside him. "Old CEO stealth," he joked softly, then shook his head. "I'm retired from that version of me." They sat without speaking for a while. A neighbor's wind chime stitched a soft pattern above them. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and settled. Fireflies began their slow punctuation near the hedges, tiny green lanterns winking on and off like a private language. Preston took a breath, as if he'd rehearsed the words and then decided not to. "I used to think confessing meant listing mistakes and demanding absolution. I don't want that tonight. I want to tell you the truth, and let it stand." She turned her chair slightly toward him. "All right, I was wrong," he said. "Not just about the pregnancy, about what a life is for. I told myself success would quiet the boy in me who never felt enough. It only made him louder. I thought fatherhood would expose me. I didn't realize absence would define me. When I saw the boys in that lobby, I knew I'd run out of excuses. You were right. I chose safety over love. I'm sorry." Camille listened with her hands folded in her lap. The words didn't fix the past. Nothing could, but they lined up with the man he'd been becoming in front of her eyes. That alignment mattered more than poetry. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he continued. "I don't know if I'll ever run a company like that again. I do know what I want most, to be the kind of man our sons can point to when they're asked what integrity looks like. To be the kind of partner who doesn't withdraw when things get hard. If you ever decide there's a place for me beside you again, I'll honor it. If you don't, I'll honor that too. I'm here either way." A firefly floated between them and blinked once, as if co-signing restraint. Camille smiled, despite herself. "You rehearsed that last line. 3 versions," he admitted. "This one hurt the right amount." She sipped her lemonade, considering. "You know what scared me most? Not the scandal, not the cameras. The possibility that you do just enough good things to make me forget the pain. Perform your way back in." He winced. "I deserve that suspicion." "You've been steady," she said. "You didn't try to skip steps. You didn't buy big gifts and vanish. You assembled shelves and listened to space facts and sat through a recital where the microphones squeaked 15 times. That speaks louder than any speech. He held her gaze. Can I ask one thing? You can ask. If I keep going like this, if I keep choosing you three when choices are costly, could there be room for us again? Not now. Someday. Camille looked back toward the yard, where 2 fireflies looped near the walkway in slow arcs. Someday is a word with a lot of corners, she said. But yes, there could be room. She set down her glass. I'm not promising a wedding ring. I'm promising effort matched with effort. I'm promising to keep the door from slamming shut. He exhaled, a relief too careful to be greedy. That's more than I expected. She slid her hand across the small space between their chairs. He met it halfway. Their fingers fit with a familiarity that didn't erase years but didn't bow to them either. From inside, Malik murmured something in his sleep. Isaiah turned over and sighed. The wind chime offered a final phrase. They sat until the lemonade warmed, hands linked, saying little. Sometimes the most honest confessions end not in a crescendo, but in quiet, that tender place where new vows grow best. When Preston finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. Good night, Camille. Good night, Preston, she answered, voice steady. Hope, at last, didn't feel like a betrayal of wisdom. It felt like wisdom's companion. Morning came with ordinary tasks, the kind that decide a life more than any title ever could. Isaiah's shoelace snapped. Malik insisted on wearing the jersey that hadn't been washed since last. Practice. Camille discovered they were out of milk 5 minutes before they needed to leave. Preston arrived with a grocery bag and a grin. Solved one of those problems, he said, lifting the milk like a trophy. Malik cheered. Isaiah pointed at the basil pot on the balcony. We need more sun for healthy leaves, he observed. Working on it, Preston replied, moving the pot 2 inches as if it mattered. And in a small way, it did. The phone on the counter lit up with a message from a reporter. Camille flipped it face down. Another text pinged, this one from a local charity asking if Preston would sit on a panel about ethical leadership in tech. He laughed once at the irony, then said yes. Not to posture, but to say out loud what he'd learned the hard way. At school pickup, a father who'd watched the scandal from afar offered a nod that wasn't pity, it was recognition. Tough weeks, he said. Saw you at the scrimmage. You're there for your boys. It wasn't absolution. It was community, the kind that counts. On Saturday, Camille and Preston stood shoulder to shoulder at the park as the twins chased. A soccer ball with a pack of 6-year-olds who had no interest in positions or strategy. Malik scored by accident, ball off the knee, off another kid's shoe, into the net. He leapt like he'd invented sports. Isaiah followed him in a celebratory lap, arms out, commentary running the whole time. An unexpected deflection from midfield. Preston lifted them both while Camille applauded. The 4 of them a brief, bright knot of joy. Later, the 4 of them visited the bookstore where Camille and Preston first met. The owner recognized Camille instantly, and only realized who Preston was when Isaiah held up a space encyclopedia and said, Dad, look. The word hung there, not forced, not declared, simply said by a child who had decided to say it. Preston blinked hard. Camille squeezed his arm once and let the moment belong to them. They didn't decide anything that day about the future. No ultimatums, no next month deadlines, no declarations on social media. The open space itself felt holy. Life unfolded in steps, some small, some bold, each one another chance to choose truth over pretense. That evening, Camille journaled while the boys built a fort in the living room. She wrote about relief and fear living side by side, about how trust grows like ivy, slow, persistent, capable of covering old scars without pretending the wall beneath doesn't exist. She wrote one sentence and underlined it twice. He keeps showing up, and so do I. Preston tucked the twins in and stayed in the doorway for a long minute, listening to their breathing settle. The room glowed with the soft nightlight shaped like a moon. He whispered, "Good night, captains," and stepped out. On the porch again, he found Camille watching the street. No speech sat waiting on his tongue, no demand for answers pressed against his teeth. He rested his hands on the railing. She did the same. Two people, side by side, watching an ordinary block where the most extraordinary thing had happened. They had not given up. Open endings frustrate some people because they want a verdict. But families aren't courtrooms, they're gardens. You watch for new leaves. You pull weeds. You wait through dry spells and surprise showers. You celebrate the first tomato even if it's small because growth is proof. Inside, Malik called, "Mom, we need more blankets for the fort." Isaiah added, "And a flashlight, and book number 4. They laughed, turned, and went in together. Tomorrow would bring new tests. A school project, a consulting deadline, a tough memory curling back around. Tomorrow would also bring new chances to do the next faithful thing. The story didn't end here because good stories rarely end where love is still learning to speak. Which is why, dear listener, we leave the porch light on. Not to keep someone out, but to guide them home. Family, you've walked with Camille, Preston, Malik and Isaiah through heartbreak, hard choices and the quiet work of rebuilding. Now I want to hear from you. Should Camille forgive Preston and let him back fully? Is measured forgiveness, the kind with boundaries and consistency, the right path? Or should she keep him at arm's length longer to protect the progress she's made alone? What would forgiveness look like in your book? A ring, co-parenting with love but separate homes, or something in between? Drop your perspective in the comments because your wisdom helps this community grow stronger. Someone listening tonight may be standing at their own crossroads. Your words could be the guide they need. Before you go, do me a favor that truly helps this channel reach more hearts. Like this video if tonight's story moved you. Comment with your take on forgiveness. Be specific, be kind. Share it with a friend who needs encouragement. Subscribe to Mr. Comfort Stories, your home of comfort, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you've ever chosen growth over pride, if you've ever learned to apologize without excuses, if you've ever believed that people can change when they pay the cost, this story is for you. Not because it promises fairy tales, but because it honors the brave, everyday work that families do to heal. As for our 4, tonight, the boys are asleep under a blanket fort. Camille is washing 2 cups on the counter, listening for small footsteps. Preston stands in the doorway, not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as a man, learning how to be present, again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Tell me what you would do next if you were in Camille's shoes. Tell me where your line would be, what action would prove trust, what rhythm would make healing real. I'm listening. We're all listening. And if you believe someone deserves a careful second chance, say so below. If you believe trust must be earned, say that too. This community holds both truths with care. Thank you for spending your evening with me. Thank you for rooting for growth, for love with a backbone, for hope that doesn't pretend the past never happened. More stories are on the way. Until then, keep your porch light on. Someone you love might be finding their way home. Don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe to Mr. Comfort Stories. Your engagement truly helps YouTube. Push this video out so more people can find comfort and strength. See you in the next story.